Production by Liang Gu. Qianlong divorced his wife, author, Chen Lianhen. 1. The habit of complaining about injustice. Speaking of our Chinese custom, if a woman commits 7 crimes, her husband can divorce her. In fact, there are 7 crimes like this. It is not really established based on the dust laws, because our Chinese customs place a strong emphasis on the power of the husband. In this era of extremely powerful husbands, a woman is suppressed by her husband's authority and has almost no freedom at all. Therefore, the woman is guilty of 7 crimes. The husband can divorce her in the name of Qichu, or deny the woman as his wife. But on the other hand, if a man behaves irregularly, no matter whether he commits 7 or 8 crimes, or even 1,000 or 10,000 crimes, the woman cannot deny this man as her husband. Such a very unequal situation is really unreasonable, because men are individuals, and women are also individuals. How can a man have such unreasonable authority? Not only does a woman have no authority, she even gives her happiness to the man. Deprived of everything? Well, having the misfortune of being a woman in life is really pitiful to say the least. Moreover, if a woman has 7 outbursts, the explanation is not very clear. Even if the woman has nothing to blame, the man may as well talk about it and forcefully bring it to Qichu's words. The so-called wanting to incriminate is why there is nothing to say. In this way, not only is the woman's happiness deprived by the man's authority, but even her life is under the man's control. Then the woman is really insecure. However, this kind of divorce is not an honorable thing for men. Therefore, even though the upper-middle-class family uses its authority to suppress women, it is not always on their lips that they talk about it frequently. However, in this vast world, there are not many women who are unfortunately divorced by their husbands. Needless to say, being an emperor is so dignified. Even if you don't care about face and divorce the queen, let's look at history and see how many things have happened from ancient times to the present. It can be seen that being born as a woman, whether born into an emperor's family or a commoner's family, is the same pitiful thing. Now I will write a paragraph about the emperor's divorce from his wife. Let the officials have some fun after tea and wine. Maybe when you see it, you may say that the emperor is ruthless and shed tears of sadness for the poor empress. Stop gossiping. Let's talk about the emperor's divorced wife written below, which is also the secret history of the pre-Qing dynasty. The main characters in the book. Of course it's the emperor and the empress. Who is the emperor? It is the 4th son of Emperor Yongzheng, the famous Emperor Qianlong. Then who is the queen? It was Empress Fu Cha, the daughter of Fu Heng, the imperial guard's leader. It turned out that before Emperor Qianlong ascended the throne, he was still a prince, and Emperor Yongzheng married her to Fu Heng's daughter Fukahao. Later, when Yongzheng died, Emperor Qianlong inherited the throne and made Fukahao his queen. The rich queen was a very smart and talented person. However, her appearance was not good enough. Emperor Qianlong was a little afraid of her because Fu Chao was very capable. In their early years, although the two of them were not necessarily inseparable, they still got along well. By the time he reaches middle age, the world is at peace, and if there are areas where the vassals are rebellious and do not obey the orders of the court, they will be attacked by large numbers of soldiers. The ugly people turned against each other, so the territory became bigger and bigger day by day. The martial arts was great, the barbarian people were subdued, the rice in the country was cheap and the salary was low, and the people were happy in their work. Officials who are generally good at flattering people will take advantage of this opportunity to use their official secrets. Play it today and watch it tomorrow. What he said was nothing more than flattery to promote peace and peace. No matter how big or small the official position was, it was all about competing for the throne. Please think about it, readers, who wouldn't want to hear sweet flattery? Moreover, at this time, Emperor Qianlong also believed that his achievements were high and prestigious, which was not the only thing seen before the founding of the Qing dynasty. Even the emperors of previous dynasties who prospered their country and established their empires may not all be better than him. Therefore, when I saw the flattering memorials of ordinary officials, I became even more happy, and gradually I thought about the appearance and appearance. There must be many officials and ordinary palace supervisors who have no regard for their integrity. After guessing Emperor Qianlong's psychology, he came up with many ideas and made many plans. Things that Emperor Qianlong never thought of were at his mercy. Although Emperor Qianlong found it very satisfactory, it only hindered the eyes and ears of Empress Fu Cha. I don't dare to do it blatantly. 2. The emperor and the empress turned against each other. It is said that Emperor Qianlong felt very proud because the world was at peace and he heard the flattering words in his ears. He thought that the world was all right, so he focused on his voice and appearance. Generally shameless ministers and palace supervisors. In addition to memorials praising peace, many methods of entertainment and banquets were also introduced. The flowers, plants, trees, stones, birds, animals, ponds and ridges in the palace were all ready-made. There were also countless concubines in the 3 palaces and 6 courtyards, who could play and sing. Some were as beautiful as flowers, and some were as light as swallows. Which one thing does the imperial family not have? Whatever you want, do whatever you want. I am here today and will be there tomorrow. I feel so uncomfortable and unhappy. However, Emperor Qianlong was afraid that Empress Fu Cha would be displeased, so he did not dare to do it openly and did it in a sneaky way, often in the midst of excitement. I always had some worries, and gradually I became bolder and no longer bothered to deal with political affairs. Sure enough, after being informed by Fu Cha, he thought that it was not a good sign to be full and suffer losses, so he tried his best to persuade him in front of Qianlong. Emperor Qianlong was originally a person who liked false fame. After listening to Fu Cha's advice, although he was very unhappy, he had to agree to it in order to protect his own reputation. In fact, his agreement was not out of sincerity, but he was afraid that because of the persuasion, he and Fu Cha had lost their harmony. Wouldn't it make people laugh? Even if people don't dare to tell a joke, they are afraid that they will talk about him behind his back. Only with this objective thought could he tolerate the advice from Empress Fucha. Unexpectedly, Empress Fucha still didn't know what was good, and kept nagging in front of Emperor Qianlong all day long. Emperor Qianlong couldn't bear it anymore, and his tolerance gradually turned into hatred. Generally speaking, there is nothing good or bad in human communication. I find in my heart that although the person is unhappy, as long as he doesn't express it. You can also go there in a daze. It would be terrible if one day the mask was revealed and the person vented his anger. Since Empress Fucha was hated by Emperor Qianlong, she set off the medicine thread like a firecracker. However, at this time when the gunpowder had just been lit and the gunpowder had not been ignited, although there were some unoptimistic phenomena, it was still possible to live happily ever after. Therefore, although Emperor Qianlong hated Empress Fucha at this time, he did not get too angry and allowed Empress Fucha to do so. Nagging in my ears all day long. He just ignored it. In his mind, he originally wanted to speak earnestly and listen to it with contempt, so that after observing it, he would know the style and interests, so he didn't need to take it too seriously, so he would just make do with it. Unexpectedly, Empress Fucha was a bit weird by nature, but the more Emperor Qianlong refused to listen, the more she talked and became more energetic. Readers, please think about it, as the old saying goes, it's enough to say nothing without speculation. Now Emperor Qianlong and Empress Fucha were already talking to each other, and the more they talked, but Empress Fucha had 1,000 words to say. How could Emperor Qianlong tolerate this? So until later. When Emperor Qianlong was angry, it was like setting off firecrackers to ignite the gunpowder. Setting off firecrackers ignited the gunpowder, cracking and clapping, and the sound was endless. I will give the first little ending to the relationship between the two of them at this time. He said that this was the beginning of the quarrel between the two of them. In the future, they would quarrel because of the quarrel, criticize their cheeks because of their quarrels, kick their feet because of their cheek criticism, divorce because of their kicks, and lose their hair and become a nun because of their divorce. It was not until later that Fu Chaho died of anger. Emperor Qianlong not only had no regrets about his past, but even had the heart to turn a pile of dead bones into ashes. Now let me put aside the main text for now and criticize this paragraph about Qianlong's divorce from his wife. As the main text, please listen. Emperor Qianlong was originally a wise and promising emperor, and his achievements were indeed pretty good. However, he has not cultivated his personal ethics, and there is something really unjustifiable about his moral character. Looking at his treatment of Fu Cha, it can be said that he was loyal and unfaithful, and ruthless and unjust. As for Empress Fucha, although she was a loyal advocate and was convicted because of her loyalty, it seems very pitiful, but he was too willful and too ignorant. I'll explain this matter clearly and cut off the gossip. I'll get into the text next time. 3. Tiran Palace is suddenly stunning. Let's talk about the inside of the palace. There were originally many concubines. Emperor Qianlong spent all day in the palace looking at flowers, playing in the east and resting in the west. He didn't care about the nagging of the imperial concubine, and just had fun and joked with the concubines all day long, so he felt very comfortable. Time flies like an arrow, and I don't realize how long it's been. Emperor Qianlong was a little tired of playing. Because among the many concubines in the palace, although there are no ugly ladies with pockmarked faces and lameness, there are also no peerless beauties. Emperor Qianlong played with them at first and found them all very agreeable. I realized that none of the concubines were extremely talented, so my interest gradually waned. One day, in the late spring weather, Emperor Qianlong woke up from his nap in the banquet hall. He was about to go to the Shiyuan for a stroll when he saw Empress Fucha standing next to the imperial couch. Emperor Qianlong leaned on the dragon pillar of the royal couch, knowing full well that Fucha would suppress his happiness with another unpleasant chatter, so he just pretended that he had not seen it. Fucha later saw that he was awake and closed his eyes again, as if he was about to fall asleep again. Knowing that this was her pretense, she got impatient and stepped forward to say, "Your Majesty, do you dare to feel exhausted these days? According to news point of view, while you are alive, you can enjoy yourself in the moment, but the prosperity are all fleeting, so what's the fun? Your Majesty still wants to rest the dragon body." Emperor Qianlong didn't wait for him to finish speaking. He pretended to be snoring and fell asleep without paying any attention to him. After Fu Cha got into trouble, he had to leave quietly. Emperor Qianlong also left the imperial couch after waiting for the Fucha Empress to leave. He took 2 young palace eunuchs with him until he came to Tiran Palace. It turned out that the concubine in Tiran Palace was named Yunjiao, so she was named Yunfei. She was a good-born concubine and was considered to be the best in the imperial family, so she was loved by Emperor Qianlong. On this day, Emperor Qianlong had dinner at concubine Yun's place. After teaching the palace maids to play the bombs and having fun for a long time, they were waiting for concubine Yun to undress and have a rest. Suddenly, they saw a palace maid standing outside the palace holding a silk gauze lantern. Emperor Qianlong accidentally touched it in the middle of his eyes and felt that the palace maid had peach cheeks and willow eyebrows, and her cherry lips were licking her hands. He is very handsome, and although his figure is not slender, he is as gentle as jade. Emperor Qianlong saw the maid clearly, and how could he miss the opportunity, so he summoned her to meet her. The palace supervisors had already shouted, and the palace maid hurriedly entered. "Kneel before Emperor Qianlong." Concubine Yun asked first, "Aren't you Meiyu, the maid of Jingming Palace? What are you doing here? Long live the good life." When the palace maid saw him for the first time, she was so panicked that she couldn't say anything. She still knelt down in the dust and didn't dare to raise her head. Emperor Qianlong saw that the palace maid was really cute, so he ignored concubine Yun and held her up with one hand, saying, "Your name is Meiyu, and you are worthy of the name. But with such a talented person, why have I never seen her before?" Meiyu lowered her pink neck and started playing in a graceful voice. The maid is serving concubine Fu of Jingming Palace, because Lord Long-Live has only been to Jingming Palace twice. At that time, the maid was ordered by concubine Fu to come here to invite concubine Yun to talk. I don't know if Long-Live is here, but the maid is reckless. Deserve to die 10,000 times. Then he knelt down again. A soft and clear voice like the song of an oriole made Emperor Qianlong dance with joy, and he said to concubine Yun, "There is such a talent in Jingming Palace, and I almost missed her. It is a lucky coincidence that I am very happy to meet you here tonight. I always thought it was 6,000 fendai. Except for Qingqing, there is no one else who can be noticed. Who would have known that within 10 steps, there must be grass? I have found this girl, plus Qingqing. It is difficult to say that she is beautiful. Now I want to make her a concubine, so I will call her Jade Concubine. She will be in the rank of Qingqing." What does Qingqing mean? Concubine Yun listened. Knowing that the enemy was coming, of course I was very unhappy, but I was afraid that Emperor Qianlong would offend me, and I thought that the matter had reached this point, and I would never be able to get rid of it, so I took this opportunity and ended up having a personal relationship with each other. Said, Sister Mayu is indeed a good friend of this slave. She looks like a slave and has a mean and ugly face, but she is not as good as the beautiful Jade sister who is one of 10,000. Long live the wise promotion, Nu Shi is very happy. Emperor Qianlong was very happy to see that concubine Yun was not jealous. As expected, he made Mayu the concubine and placed her in the Zhaoqing Palace, waiting for a banquet tomorrow. Concubine Jade was overjoyed. Retreat with thanks. Emperor Qianlong rested at concubine Yun's house that night. 4. Concubine Chenjin's special favor. It is said that Emperor Qianlong saw the beautiful Jade from the Jingming Palace in the Tiran Palace. He was so surprised that he was a peerless beauty. He named her a Jade concubine and placed her in the Zhaoqing Palace. That night, he stayed with concubine Yun of Tiran Palace. After spending the whole night without talking, he got up early the next day, finished discussing affairs at court, returned to the palace, and arranged a royal banquet in the Zhaoqing Palace. All the palace concubines had come to congratulate concubine Jade, and there were also ordinary palace maids singing, dancing and playing music, making it very lively until midnight. Emperor Qianlong fell in love with concubine Jade, who was very cunning and flattering by nature. After a night of love, Emperor Qianlong was obsessed with her. There was no need to elaborate on the matter. The spring night is short, and I don't realize that the sky has broken, and the red sun is full of curtains, so I just wash up. Emperor Qianlong issued a decree to reward concubine Jade with many treasures. Generally, the concubines, palace maids and palace supervisors all knew that Jade concubine was a newly favored concubine. They thought that by marrying Jade concubine, they could say good things in front of Emperor Qianlong, so everyone rushed to serve Jade concubine. Once Qingyun got his way, he was very unhappy, but he only suffered from concubine Yun and annoyed Empress Fu Cha. It turned out that Emperor Qianlong had neglected concubine Yun since he got concubine Yun. Concubine Yun became more and more angry as she thought about it, so she had no choice but to relax and listen to them. Although the Empress Fu Cha was a smart person, she didn't know what to do. Now that she knew Emperor Qianlong had acquired a jade concubine, she thought she could use the topic to give some loyal advice. It happened that early that morning, Emperor Qianlong retired from court and returned to the palace. As soon as he entered the palace gate, there was already a jade concubine waiting for him. When Fu Cha came across from him again, Concubine Yu stepped forward to salute because she was the queen. Empress Fu Cha was so arrogant and ignored her. She just nagged Emperor Qianlong and said, "Your Majesty has a new favorite concubine. He must be very happy and hopes to cherish it for the country." Emperor Qianlong knew that Fu Chaho liked to talk a lot, so he struck up a conversation and left. Concubine Jade knew that Fu Cha was full of jealousy. She was very smart, so she let Emperor Qianlong go, but she still stood there. Fu Cha later saw that Emperor Qianlong had left. I was a little angry, so I wanted to take it out on Concubine Jade, and said, "The Emperor has always been diligent, honest, and thrifty. He eats and drinks every day, but he has become idle since you came into his life. I am preparing to take the throne. In order to abide by the laws of my ancestors, I should have punished you." Concubine, you didn't wait for her to finish. With a smile on his face, he said, "What the Empress said is a bit inconsistent. I am promoted by the Emperor's grace. I did not invite the Emperor to come. The Emperor is very diligent and thrifty. He wears clothes at night and eats at night. My maid does not know how to be idle. Suppose the Emperor promoted his maid." He said it was laziness, which would be very wrong to blame the Emperor. The maidservant is indeed a fool and is not as good as the concubines, but if the Emperor has a few more concubines, it does not necessarily mean that he is idle. Needless to say, a common man has 3 wives and 4 concubines. How can he be considered the Emperor? Should one's life be the same? This scene made Fu Cha speechless. It turns out that the cleverness of Empress Fu Cha was no match for the cleverness of Concubine Jade, because the intelligence and talent of Empress Fu Cha only knew a few words and was not as eloquent as Concubine Yu. It is beneficial to be able to make sense out of the unreasonable. After Fu Cha was in trouble again, he was just waiting to get angry because of his embarrassment and wanted to meet her. Suddenly, his thoughts changed and he thought that he was born in a noble family and was not promoted from a humble position like her, so why should he compete with her for this leisure time? So after enduring a lot of sulking, I didn't care about Concubine Yu and actually left. Seeing Empress Fu Cha's appearance, Concubine Yu thought Empress Fu Cha was easy to mess with, but she became proud of herself, so she became proud and complacent day by day. She felt that she was the first favored celebrity around the Emperor, and no one could offend her. The Queen would give her some credit. From then on, she looked great in the palace and enjoyed herself. Although Emperor Qianlong loved her very much, it was only because she took advantage of her power and bullied others. There was some disapproval in my heart, but after all, I loved her. so there is beauty everywhere. The jade concubine was deeply loved by Emperor Qianlong, and her pride became more and more unbridled. She didn't even care about the queen. How could there be so many concubines? Therefore, everyone is not necessarily good. But the concubines wanted to marry her, and no matter how proud she was, she had no choice but to accept it. Since Empress Fucha is a queen, of course she refuses to overwhelm her and instead looks up to her. Concubine Jade also thought she was invincible in the palace, and only the queen was her opponent. Looking for suspicion and gaps everywhere, the situation becomes icy charcoal. 5. Due to jealousy, the concubine was banished. It is said that concubine Jade was arrogant because of her favor. Not only did many of the concubines look up to her, but almost even Empress Fu Cha didn't look down on her. Of course Empress Fu Cha was not very happy when she saw her looking so proud. As a result, the two became incompatible. That day, Emperor Qianlong was discussing state affairs with ministers in the Hall of Supreme Harmony. Because of the important matter, he retired a little late. Empress Fucha took advantage of this opportunity and came to Zhaoqing Palace, hoping to use a topic to reprimand concubine Jade to express her sullenness. It turned out that concubine Jade and Emperor Qianlong played together all day long. After Fu Cha, he had long wanted to find some quarrel, but he was in the way of Emperor Qianlong's eyes and ears, so he kept sulking and postponed it. Now that I had this opportunity, how could I miss it? I arrived at the Zhaoqing Palace in 2 steps. When they faced each other, they looked at concubine Jade seriously and said, "Although you have been favored by the emperor and promoted to be his beloved concubine, it's just because of your status that you are still a concubine. Besides, you are young and things may not be clear to you, so you should always pay attention. If you are arrogant because of favor, then I want to abide by the family law of my ancestors. I don't care about your face anymore." Concubine Jade listened and replied with a look of pride on her face, "Since I received the emperor's favor, no one else has said anything. Only the empress is always at odds with me. I am just a concubine. How dare you? Tied with the empress?" The empress said that the maid should always pay attention to it, but the maid is not sensitive and doesn't know what to pay attention to. The maid is young and doesn't know what's going on. But she can guess at least 70% about the empress's psychology. Fu Cha later saw that she was still quarreling and said a long story. He couldn't help but screamed, "You said you guessed half or 8 of my psychology. What exactly is my psychology?" After hearing this, concubine Jade sneered slightly and said indifferently, "Don't be upset, Your Majesty, and don't misunderstand me. Your Majesty is the same with your maid as you are with your Majesty." Said. He sneered again and again. Later, when Fu Cha saw that she was speaking with sarcasm, he became even more speechless, so he scolded, "You shameless thing, how dare you say such words to frustrate me? To be honest with you, you are not worthy of quarreling with me. If you want to quarrel with me, you will do the same thing." Sin is unforgivable. Don't think that because of the emperor's favor, You don't know what is good and what is evil. You must remember that I am in control of the palace. If you behave unreasonably again, I can send orders to punish you. Even your life is under my control." After hearing this, concubine Yu knew that Empress Fucha was really angry. How smart she was! She had long since taken advantage of the wind and was speechless. Fucha later saw that she didn't answer, so he had no choice but to walk out. After concubine Yu waited for Fucha to leave, she felt that she had just been scolded. It's really uncomfortable to feel stuffy in the stomach. Moreover, with the maids and palace supervisors nearby, it was hard to save face, and one person was only thinking about ways to take revenge. It happened that Emperor Qianlong came back from the court, and she saw Emperor Qianlong stepping into her palace. Fortunately, she knew how to be pretentious. A pair of tears had already formed in his eyes, and they fell down all over his cheeks. When Emperor Qianlong saw this, he was confused for a moment and asked her in a low voice, "Do you dare to be bullied by others? If anyone dares to bully you, explain it quickly and I will make the decision for you." Concubine Jade saw that Emperor Qianlong treated her very attentively, and thought to herself, "If you don't do anything, you will take the opportunity to take revenge." Then he looked at Emperor Qianlong with tears in his eyes, still lowering his head, sobbing and crying. The more he cried, the sadder he became, and he became even more energetic. Emperor Qianlong was also a smart man, so he expected that Empress Fucha might have some issues with her, so he said, "Have you dared to say that the Empress has been here today?" Concubine Jade listened and knew that Emperor Qianlong had reached the topic, so she followed the trend and burst into tears. When Emperor Qianlong saw her crying very miserably, he thought she must be extremely sad, so he stopped asking her. Instead, he dragged a young palace maid over to interrogate her in detail. The little palace maid was originally concubine Jade's confidant, and she was also a good talker, so she told Empress Fu the words of reprimand. He said it again in the same way, and added some information to make it vivid and vivid. He said a few words about what concubine Yu said to Empress Fu Cha, but avoided the important points. Emperor Qianlong listened to the words of the little palace maid and saw the pitiful appearance of concubine Jade. Of course, he was very surprised that Empress Fucha was not the one. Then he comforted concubine Jade and said, "You have suffered a loss today. I have my own opinion." Seeing that the plan was done, concubine Jade stopped crying and waited for her suffocation to come out. 6. Show off your talents and play the role of your favorite concubine. It is said that concubine Jade scolded Fu Cha and cried in front of Emperor Qianlong. Emperor Qianlong saw him crying very miserably, and because he knew Empress Fucha's temper, he was very surprised by Empress Fucha's behavior. "I had already made up my mind," comforted concubine Jade, left Zhaoqing Palace, and strolled to Yangxin Palace. "I randomly read a few pages of ancient books in the hall. I was about to send the little palace eunuch to the middle palace to invite the rich inspector to meet him later." The Empress Fu Cha wanted to explain the matter to Emperor Qianlong, so before the little palace eunuch made a move, Empress Fu Cha ran into the palace. When Emperor Qianlong saw Fu Chaho, he did not wait for Fu Chaho to speak. They met each other and asked, "Has the queen ever been physically tired? Why do you need to lose your temper all the time?" After listening to this, Fu Cha felt that Emperor Qianlong's tone was somewhat protective of the jade concubine, so he said angrily, "Could it be that the emperor said this for the shameless jade concubine?" Ever since concubine Jade was blessed, she has always been above the slaves. Things in the palace are really terrible. The emperor is wise and should punish her. Emperor Qianlong heard this and said unhappily, "The queen always has such a temper, why should she be so narrow-minded? When I look at the jade concubine, I may not even want to be above the queen, but the queen often loses her temper and tries to suppress me." After saying that, he ignored Fu Chaho and just read his book. After Fu Cha, he was in trouble again, and he grunted for a long time. Seeing Emperor Qianlong being lazy and ignoring him, he had no choice but to return to the palace. After all, he is a well-educated and sensible person, thinking that concubine Yu is always proud, and the emperor also knows it. This time he quarreled with concubine Yu, and he did not blame concubine Yu wrongly. Now the emperor is protecting concubine Yu. This must be because the emperor listened to Jade concubine's slander and preconceived ideas, so he focused on Jade concubine's side. I also wanted to confess to Emperor Qianlong in person, but I was afraid that his ears would not listen. Fu thought about it for a long time and decided that speaking orally was not as good as writing, so she relied on her full talent. After starting to write in ink, it was not long before a long memorial was written, describing in detail the pride and quarrels between concubine Yu and herself after her marriage. That memorial summoned a young palace eunuch to take him to the Yangxin Hall. Emperor Qianlong originally wanted to go to Zhaoqing Palace to hang out with concubine Jade, but after seeing Empress Fu Cha's memorial, he had to sit down and watch. In Emperor Qianlong's mind, his feelings for Empress Fu Cha were not good, but although he loved concubine Jade very much, he also felt that she was too proud. Empress Fu Cha just made a speech. Emperor Qianlong was really tired of listening to him. This time Empress Fu Cha wrote a long memorial. However, Emperor Qianlong read it from beginning to end until he felt what Empress Fu Cha said. None of it is made up out of thin air. He also remembered that concubine Yu was indeed very proud, so regarding the matter about which they were quarreling, the prejudice of protecting concubine Yu was invisibly reduced a lot, which can be regarded as the skill of Fu Chaho's writing. Let's say that after Emperor Qianlong read a long memorial written by Na Fu Cha. In my heart, I wanted to blame concubine Yu for her pride, but she still walked to Zhaoqing Palace. It was getting late at this time, and Guanglu Temple had already arranged the royal meal, so Emperor Qianlong went to drag concubine Yu to join the banquet. Unexpectedly, the jade concubine relied on her favor. Those who still pretended and refused to come over. Emperor Qianlong was impatient and a little worried. Concubine Jade didn't know that Fu Chao had reported a memorial at first, so she didn't think Emperor Qianlong had any intention of blaming her. After waiting for a long time, Emperor Qianlong finished his meal. Seeing that concubine Jade was still sitting there lifeless, Emperor Qianlong was a little tipsy after drinking a few glasses of wine. So he said to concubine you should not embarrass others too much if you are content with what you have. The queen has a bad temper, but you are too proud. Concubine Jade listened and thought that Emperor Qianlong was the emperor. Suddenly changed his tone. Someone must be making trouble. But when I turned around and thought about it, I might as well cry again to warm up Emperor Qianlong's heart, so I still cried without making a sound. With Emperor Qianlong calling out thousands of times, he was always crying. Ignore. At this time, Emperor Qianlong was drunk, and he became annoyed and said, I have brought you down to a low level, but you are not self-satisfied, proud and rude. Although what the queen said may not be credible, I have seen what you are doing now. The scene was actually not fabricated by Xiangbi. You are so willful. I will deprive you of your concubine's status and punish you for your rudeness. Concubine Jade suddenly heard this and was greatly frightened. 7. To bear deep grudges and to endure hardships. It is said that Emperor Qianlong was so proud of concubine Jade that he got angry after drinking. He reprimanded concubine Jade and wanted to remove her title. This can be regarded as the first time that concubine Xingyu has solved the problem, so concubine Yu did not expect that she was a person who had been favored for a long time, and was suddenly treated like this by the emperor, so she was very panicked. Fortunately, she is a very smart person, and she is wise in her haste. She had already planned a clever plan in her stomach, so she hurriedly knelt in front of Emperor Qianlong's knees and begged, Long live the Lord, please put aside the anger of the thunder. My servant is not being rude and disobeying the order. It is because I feel uncomfortable in my chest and abdomen today and I have not eaten all my food. Not entering is definitely not due to any quarrel with the queen. This maid is blessed with great grace from heaven and favors his concubines. Even though she is reduced to ashes, she will never be able to repay the favor of long live. How dare she be proud and rude and offend the Sacred Heart? Due to a misunderstanding, Long live the Lord wanted to deprive the servant of his title. The servant has sinned against the Holy King because of his kindness, so it would be better to die to thank Long live. There is no shame in living in secret. After saying that, Yingying bowed down and kowtowed a few times, tears streaming down her eyes again. Sure enough, the steel turned into softness around the fingers. Emperor Qianlong's belly full of nameless fire gave the tenderness of concubine Yu's tears, as if hypnotized. It turned into smoke and disappeared, but I felt that I had spoken rudely, so I actually comforted concubine Jade with a few words, and the storm came to an end. But concubine Yu couldn't feel relieved, and wanted to find out why Emperor Qianlong suddenly became angry. The palace maids and palace supervisors had already reported the letter. Only then did concubine Yu know what Empress Fucha had said in the Yangxin Hall, so she gritted her teeth and said with hatred, You and I swear we are not at odds with each other. Since you have hurt me in secret, I will one day take revenge. From then on, concubine Yu kept this matter in her heart and waited for the opportunity. Don't mention it after teasing Fu Cha. However, after Emperor Qianlong's reprimand, concubine Jade lost a lot of her pride and became gentler than before. After Fu Cha, because she was not as proud as before, she thought her own reprimand was effective. Little did he know that concubine Jade was a daring stratagem. Moreover, after Emperor Qianlong reprimanded concubine Jade, he felt that concubine Jade was not in line with his wishes. Empress Fucha kept nagging her all day long, and there were no outstanding talents in the palace. So I felt bored again. I was lazy and bored all day long, so I spent time reading in the Hall of Nourishing Heart. I accidentally picked up a copy of Jiafangji written by the Tang dynasty on the bookshelf. I thought that there were so many charming girls and beauties in the Jiafang at that time. Isn't it possible that among the many kills in the capital, none of them are worth it? Thinking of this, he made some plans in his mind, and immediately called in a few of his confidants, the palace eunuchs, and ordered everyone to change into folk clothes and go out of the city to a brothel for recreation when it gets dark. They were also told by the palace eunuch beside them that they should not make any noise. Fortunately, Emperor Qianlong didn't often stay in Zhaoqing Palace these days, so concubine Yu thought he was staying at the concubine's place nearby, and the concubine next to her thought he was staying at concubine Yu's place, so even Empress Fucha ignored him. Accommodation. Emperor Qianlong made all arrangements, and as expected, at noon, he quietly left the palace gate with 3 young palace eunuchs. The 4 of them disguised themselves as merchants and came to Zhengyangmen Street. I saw numerous shops and noisy carriages and horses. After all, on the ground floor of the capital, department stores were gathered together. The 4 of them came on foot. Turn around and go around into a side alley, called Rouge Alley. Sure enough, it lives up to its name, and there are many kills inside. As soon as they entered the alley, Emperor Qianlong stepped forward and entered the door of a house, followed by 3 palace eunuchs. There were already waiters from the brothel waiting for me. A vacant room was introduced, a girl was selected, tea, fruits and snacks were served one after another, and there was a lot of talking, laughing and joking. The 4 of them were originally called friends, so no one in the brothel felt that Tianyan was so close. When Emperor Qianlong visited the flowers for the first time, he saw the folk women, which had a unique flavor, and he was immediately overjoyed. After resting for a while, he left this house and went to that house, playing all night long. It was not until the east turned white and the sky gradually became brighter that he returned to the palace. From then on, Emperor Qianlong would change his clothes and go out for a stroll every night. As time passed, the paths inside and outside the city became familiar. So he went out of the palace alone, without the palace supervisor, and he was very loose when he arrived. Emperor Qianlong had seen almost all of the famous prostitutes in the capital, so he paid less and less attention to the concubines in the palace. 8. The maize formation is full of plague. It is said that there was a famous prostitute in the capital at this time, named Miss San. The people who walked around her were all powerful nobles, and her voice could reach directly into the palace. Therefore, people who are looking for jobs in the capital and many officials who are eager to get promoted and make money regard the girls as their tea party. They run around and admire the three girls. The threshold over there is almost broken. The third girl was born with a naturally beautiful face, but now her life is prosperous, and her food and clothing supplies are of course extra generous. The icing on the cake has made her even more famous. Since the third girl's side is full of dignitaries, it's reasonable. The third girl may be overwhelmed, but the third girl is calm, directing left and right, and the ordinary dignitaries are hovering in the middle of her palms, like a puppet singer pulling puppets. Her magic power is incomparable. Let us say that at this time there was a prime minister's son named Gaishi, who was a Wan-Yin son. Although his stomach has never been enlightened, he likes to pursue sex and pleasure, and he can be found wherever he eats, drinks and goes whoring. Now that there is such a famous third girl in the capital, does Gashina have any idea? Relying on his wealth, he wanted to use the power of money to exchange for the erotic smile of the third girl. Moreover, he was Xiangzhuang's sword dance, and he had ulterior motives. He also wanted to have a physical relationship with the third girl, so he went to the third girl to hang out with her every day. The third girl was originally a person who had been in the world for a long time and had a sharp vision. When she saw Gaishi, she had already guessed that he was an unsophisticated young man. She also knew that he was very rich. So he won him over and treated him as a rare commodity. He even used all his cunning tactics to seduce Gaishi's heart with some sweet words, and he often talked to Gaishi and seemed to be very affectionate. Fortunately, she has another ability. She can make Gaishi's soul fly away with just one frown or a smile. Gaishi thought that the third girl had feelings for him, so he tried to have a physical relationship with the third girl. The third girl also guessed Gaishi's mentality. Seeing that Gaishi had this kind of intention, she suddenly became deliberately cold. Gaishi saw that he had an air of invulnerability. I had to retreat. When the third girl saw that Gaishi wanted to avoid him, she immediately turned her face deliberately and pleasantly. Gaishi couldn't bear to avoid him, wanted to get close but didn't dare to get close. He was confused, but he still hung out with her. In less than a few months, the third girl defrauded the third girl of tens of thousands of silver. Gaishi's bedside was full of gold, but he still hung out with the third girl and couldn't bear to leave. The three girls knew that Gaishi's strength was at an end, so they looked at him with blank eyes. Gashur has arrived at this time. Only then did he realize that the third girl's purpose was to get some money from him. When the money ran out, they turned against each other and no longer knew each other. Although they knew that they had been deceived, it was too late to regret it. Gaishi was a little angry because he had been tricked by the third girl, but he did not dare to tell his father directly. But he finally wanted to devise a plan to get out of his sullen mood. Suddenly he remembered that he had an uncle named Fu Yong, who was an admiral and the commander of the 9-Gate Infantry Army. He was the uncle of the Empress Fucha, so he could be asked to make the decision. It turned out to be an official position in the capital. The big ones include the Prime Minister and the Secretariat, who wear red hats. The small ones have the inspectors, who cannot wear the hats, large and small, more than tens of millions. But when it comes to actual power, the Admiral Nine-Gate Infantry Commander is second to none. Because the infantry commander during the Han Dynasty, Zhi Jinwu, was in the capital. He also has the authority of the police to judge, and it has always been his habit. At night, he personally goes out to the 9 gates to patrol. If someone violates his rules, whether it is a civil or military official, or a local farmer, industry, or merchant, he will not care about the 21, and immediately send orders to those who would serve. The person who committed the crime was pushed to the street and rewarded with 30 big boards. Therefore, people living in Beijing are a little afraid of him when they hear about the infantry commander. This kind of official system did not exist until the late Qing dynasty. In the current era of the Republic of China, the authority of the infantry commander has been greatly reduced. But the official position still exists. This is a casual article, no need to elaborate. Let's say that Gai Shi asked Fu Yong to make the decision for him and tell him everything about the 3 girls. Fu Yong was very angry when he heard this, so he comforted Gai Shi and planned a way to punish the 3 girls. 9. The powerful servant made a fool of himself by committing violence. It was said that Gai Shi had been cheated by the 3rd girl and was unwilling to give in. He cried and complained to his uncle Fu Yong. Fu Yong listened and felt very sorry for Gai Shi. He thought that he was the commander-in-chief of the 9-gate infantry army and the prostitutes were within his own power. It is not difficult to send a servant to the 3rd girl to demand the return of the money. After the plan was settled, he called a servant to lead 12 servants to do the work, and ordered that when he got to the 3rd girl, he must ask for the original gold, otherwise he would cut off the 3rd girl's hair. The servant's name was Zhu Hu, and after receiving some orders from his master Fu Yong, he led 12 servants and hurried straight to the 3 girls, with their 3 feet 2 steps apart, like a hosen's head. It flew like gold, and it didn't take even half an hour to arrive. Then a man from the kiln went to report to the 3rd girl that the commander of the infantry army, Master Jingtang, had suddenly sent many troops to see the 3rd girl for some reason. The 3rd girl listened and already understood in her heart. It turns out that all 3 girls knew about the origin of Gai Shi's net worth. Therefore, Gai Shi wanted to rely on his uncle Fu Yong's power to suppress him, and the 3rd girl had already expected this. The 3 girls had prepared themselves for a long time, so they came out calmly. When they met Zhu Hu, knowing that he was the leader, they asked, "Why are you so noisy here?" Zhu Hu was originally a villain. Relying on the authority of the master, with a snobbish look on his face, after listening to the 3rd girl's words, he puffed up his chest and said, "The masters have been ordered by the master to come to arrest you, a prodigal, but you are a prodigal and don't know what is good or bad. I didn't kowtow to say hello to the gentleman." If you say, you, when you open your mouth, can I call you, you? Zhu Hu said, and also pretended to curse, saying a lot of things like a slut, a bastard, and a bastard. When the third girl saw his appearance, she didn't care and said with a smile, "We thought you were greeting Mr. Guy. Although Mr. Guy won't be here for a long time, I have been with Mr. Guy for a few days, and of course we have some feelings of kindness. So when I saw you, I treated you very politely. Unexpectedly, you were so arrogant. Such a situation. How does it look like a wealthy family? Maybe he's an ordinary beggar on the streets here pretending to be? If you dare to be unruly, I have many slaves here and I have ropes, so I can tie you up one by one and send you to the county government office. I will first punish you for unprovoked blackmail." Zhu Hu was furious after hearing this. He rushed forward and tried to bully the third girl because she was a woman, so he wanted to use force against her. Unexpectedly, the third girl is talented in civil and military affairs, so she is not easy to mess with. Seeing that Zhu Hu had some evil intentions, he had already rolled up his sleeves, revealing a pair of arms as white as lotus roots. When he saw Zhu Hu rushing forward, he shouted, "Are you trying to use force? First taste my fists and feet." As he said that, Zhu Hu had already arrived. The three girls raised their hands, and Zhu Hu couldn't stand and fell to the ground. The 12 servants saw Zhu Hu suffering and took advantage of the large number of people. "I want to go forward, surround and fight the third girl." The third girl had quick eyes and quick hands. She expected to be outnumbered, so she put the index finger of her left hand in her mouth and blew a sound of woo, woo. Suddenly, a dozen arrogant Kansai men walked out of a nearby room, holding out their big hands like banana fans. It seems to be grabbing people. The 12 servants were all useless at first, but by this time, they were so frightened that they were out of breath. Fortunately, they all have the ability to bend and stretch, so they took this opportunity to kneel in front of the third girl, kowtow, and beg the third girl to see their ugly appearance. Then they scolded them one by one, "Listen, dogs. Go back and tell your master that your nephews should be well controlled by themselves. How can you use your power to oppress others? Even though our industry is very humble, we still accept donations to get licenses, and we have the emperor's permission. But I don't like the money that Gaishi spent here, and I don't like this kind of illegal money. I have already donated it to the southern province for famine relief. From now on, teach your master not to cause trouble again, and not to think about revenge. If you still don't know what to do, that's not my boast. Even your master's future cannot be guaranteed." The 12 servants listened and Wei Wei agreed. Zhu Hu knelt on the ground, took the opportunity to lie down, wiped the cold sweat from his forehead, and apologized to the third girl. The third girl also ignored him. Zhu Hu winked. He led the 12 servants back quietly. 10. There was a sudden imperial edict in a brothel. It is said that Zhu Hu and others were scolded by the third girl and scurried back like rats. When they saw the rich and mediocre, they did not say anything about how they kowtowed to beg for mercy. They only said that the third girl was rude and repeated what the third girl said. He and the third girl pretended to talk about the situation of the duel with him. The rich man was so angry that his eyes were on fire and his orifices were filled with smoke. He immediately issued an order that all the brothels in the capital should be expelled within 1 day, and no prostitute was allowed to stay. If anyone dares to disobey orders, he should be held accountable. After this order was issued, many turtles who opened brothels in the capital were so frightened that they turned into drowned turtles. The prostitutes also dispersed like birds and beasts. Only the 3 girls were doing nothing, they were not in a hurry, and they still lived very comfortably. There were spies in charge of the yamen who reported to Fu Yong. Fu Yong thought to himself, since ancient times, there have only been officials with strong strengths, but I have never heard of prostitutes with strong strengths. Who is this third girl? She dares to disobey orders. Take it today, just in time to give her a big meal and send her to death, so that you can vent your anger on behalf of your nephew and cover the face of Zhu Hu and others. It was already the 3rd watch in the middle of the night. Fu Yong led the troops and arrived there. Zhu Hu forgot about what had just happened, and still stepped forward in an arrogant manner, without calling for the door, and kicked the door down with his kick. Fu Yong led many soldiers and barged in, frightening the workers in the brothel. They thought they were being robbed by robbers until they took a closer look. The soldiers all held lanterns with the words "Infantry Commander" on them. Then they realized that they were here for the 3rd girl. They hurriedly greeted them and said, "The 3rd girl has a visitor. They have rested now." Fu Yong didn't answer. He waved his hand and all the soldiers came to the courtyard. The 3rd girl heard loud noises in the courtyard from her room. She only heard someone saying, "Master, sir," and she already expected the infantry commander to come in person. Then she got up, put on a small water-red shirt, and her hair was fluffy. She looked at it sleepily and asked through the window, "Why is it so violent? You should be careful and don't disturb the noble people. It's just midnight, there's so much noise here. I'm not afraid of the nobles being frightened. I'll chop your heads off if you're guilty." After saying that, he called many big Kansai men in the side room to come out and stop the soldiers from making noise, saying, "If you have faith here, you will understand it after reading it, and you will deeply regret that you acted too rudely." After hearing this, Fu Yong refused to stop and continued shouting in the yard. Zhu Hu was about to step forward and kick the door when suddenly a piece of paper came from the room, and he heard the 3rd girl saying inside. Fortunately, the nobleman only suffered a little false alarm and has already left the tunnel. You can go back quickly and read what is said on the paper. Only then will you know that I will never lie to you. Fu Yong took the piece of paper and thought he would take a look at it. With the light, he could see that the writing was clear. It says, "Ergu, go and understand your own purpose. Admire this." There is also a red seal stamped below, which is the word "Emperor's Treasure." Fu Yong was so frightened that he broke into a cold sweat, thinking that this piece of paper was definitely not a fake. Unexpectedly, the emperor came to visit the brothel here. No wonder the third girl dared to be so arrogant with such a benefactor. After thinking for a while, she ordered the soldiers to guard the front and back doors from a distance, and she had no choice but to stumble back. Let's talk about how the third girl invited the emperor here. When Fu Yong returns home, I will write a little more. It turned out that Emperor Qianlong had been traveling incognito for several months. Although he had many acquaintances, he was the most affectionate with the third girl. Therefore, he walked the most frequently to the third girl's side. It was only because he had been wandering alone recently, and every time he went, he was always alone. The third girl became suspicious, and after paying close attention to his tone of voice, she realized that Tianyan was so close. Emperor Qianlong knew that the third girl already considered him his queen, so he did not hide it. But the people in the brothel, except for the third girl, no one knows. Fortunately, the third girl was good at maneuvering and secretly sent someone to dig a tunnel in her room. This tunnel could lead directly to the palace wall, so when Fu Yong caused trouble that night, Emperor Qianlong might be in trouble. Then quietly walked out of the tunnel. After Emperor Qianlong went out of the tunnel and returned to the palace, he was somewhat frightened, and some people already knew that he was traveling incognito, so he did not often walk around the brothel. This is something I want mention later. 11. Avoid loyalty and admonition to wutai and go to incense. It is said that Fu Yong was so happy that he led all his troops, hoping to beat the three girls to the sword and get rid of the suffocation in his chest. Unexpectedly, he hit a big nail, and his happiness turned into disappointment. When he returned home, he thought, I will get up early tomorrow morning to go to court. You might as well talk to Emperor Qianlong about this matter. Because regardless of whether this piece of paper is true or false, Emperor Qianlong will definitely not admit such an ambiguous thing to protect his reputation. If Emperor Qianlong refuses to admit it, then the third girl may have other ideas to take revenge. Fu Yong made up his mind and waited until dawn to go to court in a hurry. The kneeling had just finished, but before he could speak, Emperor Qianlong faced him and said with a smile, You are diligent in everything you do, but why do you need to be too serious? After hearing this, Fu Yong knew that there was a reason for his words, and kowtowed in thanks. He was so frightened that he didn't dare to say anything further, so he had to withdraw. When Emperor Qianlong was waiting for him to leave, he squinted his eyes at Fu Yong and whispered to the palace supervisor nearby, He actually wants to be the eagle dog of the palace. It turns out that Emperor Qianlong took Fu Yong's treatment of the third girl as the intention of Empress Fu Cha. Because Fu Yong and Empress Fu Cha's father, Fu Heng, were brothers, Empress Fu Cha had this suspicion. In fact, the rich treated the three girls in a mediocre manner. He just wanted to avenge his nephew Gaishi. Emperor Qianlong didn't know the truth. Who would want to kill Empress Fu Cha? It was really unjust. As luck would have it, Fu Yong went to explain to Fu Cha about the third girl's encounter with Emperor Qianlong. Fu Chaho listened. I was very unhappy. The dissatisfaction of Empress Fu Cha was out of good intentions. I was afraid that Emperor Qianlong often traveled incognito outside, and something might go wrong. Wouldn't it be dangerous? However, Emperor Qianlong could never appreciate his good intentions, so he tried his best to admonish him. Emperor Qianlong not only refused to listen to her, but also said to Fu Cha, "You actually want to form a party outside to subdue me? But I am not a person who wears skirts." It turned out that Emperor Qianlong had already suspected that Fu Yong's treatment of the third girl was the intention of the Empress Fu Cha. Now that Fu Cha Ho went to remonstrate with him, Emperor Qianlong became more and more suspicious of Fu Cha Ho, so he also hated Fu Cha Ho more and more. This can be regarded as Fu Cha Ho asking for trouble. Let's talk about the time Emperor Qianlong suffered a little panic from the third girl. "I'm afraid there are so many eyes and ears outside that it's inconvenient for me, so I don't dare to walk around the third girl's place anymore. It's just that he has been wandering around for a long time and has become accustomed to it. How can he hide in the palace again and be bored all day long? He would also make up his own mind, thinking that he would not have to have constant disagreements with Fu Cha Ho. It is better to go to the Queen Mother to think of a solution." He then encouraged the Queen Mother to go to Mount Wutai to offer incense. It happened that the Queen Mother heard the incense and liked it very much, so she agreed wholeheartedly. But Empress Fu Cha didn't want to go with her, and Emperor Qianlong didn't force her to go with him, so he took advantage of her. The arrangements in the palace are finalized. Send an order to Mount Wutai. Wanyu guards had already prepared all the ceremonial guards. In a few days, they were ready and they set off immediately. Mount Wutai is where Emperor Xuanji became a monk. The officials have read the secret notes of Xuanji becoming a monk. You probably understand. Nothing to mention. Emperor Qianlong arrived at Wutai Mountain to serve the Empress Dowager and stayed at Qianlong Temple. The ordinary monks in Qianlong Temple are at least busy picking up the guests. The Queen Mother saw the Buddha burning incense and was very pious when she arrived. Emperor Qianlong originally only borrowed money in the name of offering incense. To dispel his depression, but since he came to Qianlong Temple, he had no choice but to meditate while moving, so he and the abbot Huiyan of Qianlong Temple and many other monks meditated into concentration and studied the wonderful truth together. After staying there for 10 days, he usually accompanied his officials and guessed Emperor Qianlong's visit to Mount Wutai. It was just a way to relieve his boredom. Apart from monks, there was no one in Wutai Mountain who could agree with Emperor Qianlong's wishes. However, Emperor Qianlong was a man who loved his reputation. He pretended to be famous for his morale and enjoyed the mountains and forests, but in fact he had been bored for a long time. Since all the ministers were high-ranking officials and had the ability to be high-ranking officials, they all came to Emperor Qianlong and said that Shinggong should save his labor. Emperor Qianlong originally thought Mount Wutai was boring, but after listening to his officials, he took advantage of this opportunity. Then he sent an order and set off back to Beijing, still following the original route. When he arrived in the capital, he was too busy to pick up the driver and present the memorial. However, because of the hard work on the road, Emperor Qianlong honored the Queen Mother and returned to the palace to rest in peace. 12. Envy the prosperous Jiangnan and the sweat dash. It is said that Emperor Qianlong returned to Beijing after visiting Mount Wutai on behalf of the Queen Mother. It became increasingly boring in the palace. There was a little palace eunuch named Xiaoan who was very cunning. Seeing that Emperor Qianlong was uncomfortable in the palace, he said, "Since Long Live the Lord is tired of playing in the palace, why don't you go to other provinces for inspections?" Firstly, you can check out the folk customs of other provinces. Secondly, you can visit the mountains and rivers. Thirdly, you can choose a few beautiful and talented women to enter the palace. Wouldn't it be nice? Emperor Qianlong listened, and he realized what he was thinking, and said, "I have had this intention for a long time. This is what I meant when I visited Wutai Mountain last time." Unfortunately, there is nothing to do in other provinces, so what can we do? Seeing that his words had touched Emperor Qianlong's mind, Xiaoan said, "Long live my last visit to Mount Wutai." It was a misunderstanding because there was nothing to do in Mount Wutai. Now that Long Live Master wants to go somewhere else for fun, why not find a lively place? As the saying goes, there is heaven above, and there are Suzhou and Hangzhou below. Suzhou in the south of the Yangtze River and Hangzhou in Zhejiang are simply the best places, not to mention the beautiful mountains and rivers and the variety of department stores. It's like ordinary women, all of them are very pretty, and Wu Nong's soft words come out of his mouth, and his sweet and soft voice is really nice to hear. Emperor Qianlong listened to Xiaoan's words, nodded in agreement, and replied, "I have long admired the beauty of Wuyue mountains and rivers and would like to go there for a visit. Now that I hear what you say, I am even more excited about traveling and can't stop it." Emperor Qianlong said and went to report to the Empress Dowager Ming. "The Queen Mother is an incompetent person," Emperor Qianlong said. "There is no reason not to agree." Therefore, a decree was immediately sent out to arrange the ceremony. He regularly travels south to the south of the Yangtze River. This news was known to Fucha early. Emperor Qianlong thought that Empress Fucha might not be willing to go with her like last time, so he didn't take her seriously. Unexpectedly, Fu Chaho was eccentric by nature. Although he didn't want to go to Mount Wutai last time, he insisted on going to Jiangnan this time. Emperor Qianlong had always had disagreements with Empress Fucha and was often regarded as a thorn in his side, so why would he be willing to teach Empress Fucha to follow him? Therefore she was not allowed to go. After Fucha found out that Emperor Qianlong did not allow her to go, she became more and more insistent on going with him, saying that she was tired from the long journey and had to serve the Queen Mother for dinner. Emperor Qianlong saw her using the big hat of serving the Queen Mother to suppress her but ignored her, and finally refused to allow her to go. At this time, all the ceremonial guards were in place. It turned out that this trip was not like the trip to Mount Wutai last time, but that we were traveling by waterway, and we had already taken charge of the yamen. 2 large dragon boats were created, with many small dragon boats attached. There was a canal from Beijing to Jiangnan, so the dragon boats went south through the canal. While on the boat, Emperor Qianlong took a big dragon boat alone, and the Queen Mother also took a big dragon boat. Empress Fucha was originally ordered not to go, but the dragon boat was not prepared for her, so she was forced to go aboard the Queen Mother's dragon boat. Emperor Qianlong saw her stubbornness and had to listen to her, but he ignored her in the end. Let's talk about the royal boat going south through the canal. It was unusual for the emperor's family to travel. Majestic and neat, thousands of dragon boats are arranged like a long dragon. The first boat was the large dragon boat of the Queen Mother, followed by the large dragon boat of Emperor Qianlong. The many small dragon boats behind were for the officials escorted by hundreds of civil and military officials. Every morning and evening, the Queen Mother's dragon boat would go upstream. Emperor Qianlong took the dragon boat to visit her. Although it was harder on the road than in the palace, this rule will never be abolished. Along the way, Shaoxing stayed overnight and was far away from Beijing. Wild colors and mountain scenery are another kind of fun. Emperor Qianlong was among the dragon boats, sometimes looking at the landscape, sometimes reading ancient books, and sometimes chatting with the palace guards. He was not lonely there. At this time, Shaowen, the palace eunuch, was riding in the big dragon boat. Emperor Qianlong loved his knowledge and often talked and laughed with him. After traveling for many days, we have passed Sangzhou. After leaving the territory of Zhili, he entered the territory of Shandong province. Emperor Qianlong heard the palace supervisors announcing that he had entered Shandong province in the boat. He was pretending to be a celebrity sect, and suddenly he remembered that Guanzhong had set up 300 female concubines. Then he passed the decree and taught the ministers to study it. After receiving the decree, ministers usually quoted a lot of scriptures and said a lot, but they didn't know the true heart of Emperor Qianhuang, so they didn't comply with the decree. Only the palace supervisor Xiaoan understood what Emperor Qianlong meant, so he stepped forward to start the memorial. 13. Enter the beauty boat to lose your soul. It is said that Xiaoan heard Emperor Qianlong ask about Guanzhong's 300 female concubines. He had already guessed Emperor Qianlong's mentality, so he stepped forward and said, "The most prosperous place in the world now, of course, must be the first place in Jiangsu province. Yangzhou Prefecture. But besides Yangzhou, it's Jinan Prefecture in Shandong province's turn. Since Lord Long Live wants to visit the ruins of the 300 female villages established by Guanzhong, he can check it out here. If the Lord Long Live appoints me as an interviewer, I will definitely collect many test items. For Long Live Lord to test. It was probably more interesting than visiting monuments in the world and asking questions about landscapes. Long Live Lord is able to enjoy this endlessly, so he can be called a sea of blessings. Emperor Qianlong felt very happy after hearing this, and ordered Shaoan to be the interview envoy. Collect the remains of 300 women. Shaoan obeyed the imperial edict and secretly sent his cronies to Jinan to collect all the famous prostitutes in Jinan Prefecture. At this time, the imperial ship was not far from Jinan, although Shaoan was well prepared. But he was afraid that Emperor Qianlong might pretend to be a Taoist, so he didn't dare to send it immediately. Tomorrow, the ship has arrived in Jinan, and there happens to be a slight drizzle. The scenery is really lovely with the light smoke in the space. At this time, Emperor Qianlong came back from an audience with the Queen Mother. Sitting alone on the boathouse, a man seemed to have some imagination about the scenery of the mountains and rivers. Shaoan took this opportunity to point to a densely populated place not far from the boat and said, "This is where the daughter-in-law is now." Shaoan just finished speaking. The officials and family members announced that they had arrived in Jinan. Qianlong was suddenly touched and quietly said to Shaoan, "I feel very relaxed today, and the scenery here is very quiet, so it should be decorated with some decorations. And I want to learn about customs, if not directly among the people. I can't know the details. It seems that this is the best place for the test items mentioned yesterday." Shaoan listened and Weiwei wanted to leave. Emperor Qianlong called him back again and said, "Don't be busy. Let me ask you first, has it been a long time since you got such a talent?" Shaoan listened, but didn't speak first. He still responded vaguely and left. After waiting for a while, I heard the rumble of cars coming straight from the shore to the big dragon boat where the emperor was sitting. If you take a closer look, you can see that it is a small oil curtain car belonging to BMW Xiangdan. The car is full of beautiful girls. They are all beautiful women in their 20s and 80s. Some are holding zither, some are holding pipa, and some are holding flutes. Some are fat, some are slim, some are graceful, some are light. They are like a colorful cloud, blown down by the wind. One by one they fell into the dragon boat. When Emperor Qianlong arrived, his eyes were confused, as if he was on the mountainside and overwhelmed. When the prostitutes came into the boat, Shaoan led them to kowtow in front of Emperor Qianlong. Their names were announced one by one, and they all knelt on the ground to wait for the order. Emperor Qianlong then ordered them to sit on the ground and take turns playing the skills. So he played and sang. After singing for a while, they lined up again and started dancing. They all originally wore light skirts and long sleeves. Therefore, the dance looks like many famous and exotic flowers gathered together, and against the brilliance of lamps and candles, it becomes more and more diverse and dazzles the eyes. It had been busy for a long time, and it was already late at night. Emperor Qianlong thought that I was drunk and wanted to sleep, so he sent an order to Shaoan to come over. A lot of gold and silk were brought out, and anyone who sang or danced would be rewarded. Then he said to Shaoan, "I want to keep a few of them here to serve the night and send them back tomorrow. I wonder if that's possible?" Shaoan listened and whispered, "They are night mothers, how can they not do it? If they can bear the rain and dew, they are really lucky to have waited for 3 lifetimes. As long live Lord directs them, whoever among them will be more blessed will be the winner." Emperor Qianlong was overjoyed when he heard this. He sought the most beautiful among the beautiful and the best among the best. He chose 6 stunning prostitutes who were rich in beauty and had extraordinary attitudes. Many other prostitutes were sent ashore. These 6 prostitutes took turns waiting for the night. Among the 6 prostitutes, one named Sai Hongfu was even more favored. From that night till dawn, there was really nothing but joy and pleasure among the dragon boats, the tenderness and happiness of the romantic emperor. It can really make anxious children salivate. 14. Exerting foolish loyalty and sparse grass in the middle of the night. It is said that since ancient times, emperors have often seen prostitutes in history. However, it is too unscrupulous to want to lean on the green and enjoy the red flowers in the middle of a trip in public. However, the only person Emperor Qianlong was afraid of was the Empress Dowager. The palace supervisors all knew that the Empress Fu Cha was the one they paid most attention to. Because Empress Fu Cha knew many secret things about Emperor Qianlong after many times of loyal advice. So for the sake of loyalty, she wanted to correct him at any time. At noon that night, when Emperor Qianlong was dying in the dragon boat, the news had already reached the eyes and ears of Empress Fu Cha. After checking it out, I didn't quite believe it at first. When she went to the big dragon boat where the emperor was sitting to inquire about the news, she could only hear music, singing and dancing in the dragon boat, and it was so lively that she sighed a few times, thinking that such a debauched thing really happened. I returned to my boat alone, with my head on the pillow, and could no longer sleep peacefully. Regardless of the midnight watch, he got out of bed and wanted to write a remonstrance with deep sorrow, which made Emperor Qianlong wake up. He thought about it over and over for a long time, but felt that it was difficult for him, so he decided to write. I was just about to write quickly. She was also planning the words to write in the middle of her stomach, but before she could hear the distant sounds of singing and dancing in the middle of the royal ship, she felt so confused that she couldn't write. It turns out that Fu Cha's literary talent was originally very good, but because of the deep stimulation in his chest muscles, his thinking became dull. And because the sounds that came into contact with her ears were nothing more than pornographic songs, she was even more distressed when she heard them. Of course, her literary thoughts were even more blocked. After waiting for a while, the people beside the royal boat were heard shouting and shouting. This was the story that Emperor Qianlong had kept 6 prostitutes. While sending the rest of the prostitutes ashore. After the inspection, Fu thought that everyone had been sent ashore, so after hearing this sound, he said to himself, "The demonic fog has dispersed, maybe we can see the sun again." At this time, the remonstrance she wrote had come true. Then I thought of going in to start playing again at dawn. According to the rules of the palace, whenever the concubine plays something, the palace supervisor can report it at any time, and there is no need to wait for the throne to be called before starting the play. Besides, we are traveling halfway, and there is no need to ascend to the imperial palace. So just cross the boat and report it. But it was already late at night, and we would have to wait until dawn before we could cross the boat. However, Empress Fu Cha sighed deeply at this time. Thinking about it, her mind felt like a tide. Suddenly she remembered the time in Beijing. When Emperor Qianlong visited the 3 girls in disguise, he felt even more uneasy. He thought that Emperor Qianlong refused to remonstrate and was covering up his wrongdoing, and in the end he would definitely destroy the country. Now he has started to indulge in debauchery in the middle of the road. If he doesn't give advice and give advice, then he will be overturned. How can there be a complete egg? It would be better to be a piece of jade than to be ruined. If the emperor can appreciate his sincerity and change his mind, that would be the best. Otherwise, it would just be a sacrifice of this small body. Besides, the relationship is already bad, and living in this world is not interesting at all, so why bother falling in love with him? Empress Fu Cha thought of this alone and shed tears miserably, but she never imagined that the romantic Emperor Qianlong was currently participating in the zen of joy with the enchantress. According to the custom in the palace of the former Qing dynasty, if the emperor is lucky. There was a silk lantern hanging on the wall of the palace where the concubine was blessed. Even though it was on the water, the palace supervisors still hung the red lantern on the royal boat as usual. It happened that at this time, Empress Fu Cha was sticking her head out of the ship's window, looking at the ship in the distance. The flickering light was directly opposite to the eyeliner of the rich inspector. The enemy was on a narrow road and he was extremely jealous. After Fu Cha saw the obscene sign, he became increasingly sad and couldn't help but exclaimed, "Alas! So debauched." When he thought of this, he really couldn't bear the blockade. Then he stood up excitedly, called a palace eunuch who was a close attendant, and explained the matter to the palace eunuch. The palace eunuch's name was Sun Yi, and he was a loyal man. He was very loyal to the Empress Fu Cha, and the Empress Fu Cha treated him as a confidant. So after Fu Cha was stimulated this time, she told him first. After being in Fu Cha, I originally wanted to teach Sun Yi to follow the rules when he was in the palace, cross the boat to deliver the report, and immediately go to see Emperor Qianlong and tell Emperor Qianlong's debauchery and faults face to face. 15. Grateful for the Thorn's desperate move. It is said that after Fu Cha heard that Emperor Qianlong was having fun and making fun of prostitutes in the middle of the dragon boat, he drafted a remonstrance. I was about to go on the boat to meet him in person, when I happened to see a silk lantern hanging on the dragon boat. She was already filled with worries, but the sight of the lantern only added fuel to the fire, so she called the palace eunuch Sun Yi over, wanting to go there immediately and tell Emperor Qianlong's debauchery and faults to his face. When Sun Yi saw Fu Cha, he became really angry and became extremely angry. He felt that he should never act rashly, because doing things too rudely would be very harmful to Empress Fu Cha herself, so in order to protect Empress Fu Cha, he wanted to use some polite words to dissuade her. At that time, Empress Fu Cha had already walked away, waiting to step out of the cabin. Sun Yi saw that something was urgent. He took hold of Empress Fu Cha's clothes and advised, "It is already the 4th watch, and the emperor must have rested. Even if the emperor has not rested yet, he is still willing to summon the empress to come in. Why bother to brave the wind and do like this? Can't wait? According to the slave's wishes. It's better to wait until dawn. Besides, the Empress has eaten very little recently and has been sleeping restlessly. Why on earth did she end up in such a miserable state? Now, if your Majesty has to be dispatched somewhere, the servant can go there on your behalf, and you can take care of yourself." After hearing this, Fu Cha felt that what he said was very reasonable, and after thinking about it in his mind, he stood still with his feet on his feet. He held a chapter of advice in his hand and stood blankly, really like a wooden chicken. When Sun Yi saw Fu Cha's situation, he knew that his words had touched her heart, so he took this opportunity. He said quietly, "I heard what Shaoan told me yesterday." He said that the Emperor had already told the Queen Mother to teach the Queen Mother to pass the decree. The Queen must always serve the Queen Mother and not often break into the royal ship. He also cited the example of the Emperor's southern tour, so it makes sense. Now the Queen Mother has given permission for the Emperor to come to the throne. In this way, if the Queen Mother breaks into the royal ship now, I am afraid something unexpected will happen, and it is not just a crime of anger in the middle of the night. Empress Fu Cha knew very well that Emperor Qianlong was not on good terms with her. But he didn't expect that he would go to the Queen Mother and not allow her to break into the royal ship, so he said without panic, "Is there such a thing? Now let me ask you first." In the middle of the royal ship, there were loud music and loud laughter. Who composed the music? Nowadays, people are dispersed in the wine market. The red light is hanging high on the stern of the boat. Who is the lucky person? Did you know? Sun Yi replied, "I know this." These were all introduced by Shaoan. Those women, what else, are just some kiln girls. Now the Emperor keeps a few of them. The clouds are stirring for the rain. I recommend pillows and mats on the balcony to dream of the fragrant dream of Gaotang. But the slave had something to say. Please forgive me. Because among the emperors and princes from ancient times, which one has not been romantic? The Empress can relax her belly as much as she wants, so why should she be so brooding? After listening to Sun Yi's words, Fu Chao shook his head and said, "No, did I go to remonstrate just because I was jealous? You don't know the profound meaning here, so you want to tell me not to be too narrow-minded. This is not knowing my words, and you are in vain to be my confidant. I think the Emperor inherited the throne at a young age and has a reputation of being wise and wise. The people of the world hope that the world will be peaceful from now on." Unexpectedly, the Emperor was full of troubles and suddenly became passionate and lustful, as if Emperor Tang Ming had gone from the Kaiyuan era to the Tianbao era. And not only does it look like the Tianbao era of Emperor Ming of the Tang dynasty, it actually looks like the leopard room of Emperor Zhengde of the Ming dynasty. Our family's century-old foundation is bound to be overthrown. Since I am the Empress of the palace, of course I am closely related to each other. How can I just sit back and say nothing? So now I am determined to go and give my best advice. If the Emperor can listen to me, it will be a blessing to the court and a blessing to the country. If you don't listen to me, you can send my lining clothes and the words I wrote to my natal family, and all the gold and pearl clothes I have. I will reward you with everything, even if you don't have to be attached to this place anymore. You can just go and make a living. As for my future safety, you don't have to think about it now. All in all, I am fighting for my life," said Fu Chaho. He handed the manuscripts on the table and the clothes on the imperial couch to Sun Yi, and said, "Please remember my words, and don't forget them." Sun Yi listened and could only cry and accepted the order. 16. Being insulted after being loyal and virtuous. It was said that Fu Cha later gave the manuscript and clothes to Sun Yi. She also told Sun Yi not to forget her words, but Sun Yi had to cry and accepted the order. He felt that it was really miserable, so he used many words to comfort her. Unexpectedly, Empress Fu Cha had already made up her mind, but despite Sun Yi's thousands of words, he finally ignored it. Been waiting for a long time. The east is already white, and the sky is bright. Empress Fu Cha had something on her mind, so she had no time to wait, so she ran across the boat and rushed into Emperor Qianlong's bedroom without waiting for the palace supervisor to report. Because she had been stimulated all night and overused her brain, she was in a trance. So I couldn't think of anything wrong with just barging in. At this time, Emperor Qianlong was sleeping on the imperial bed with two prostitutes, Sai Hongfu and Sai Shishir, having sweet dreams. Qianlong worked hard all night and fell asleep at dawn, but he didn't hear anyone coming in. So some people don't think so. Only Sai Hongfu was particularly sensitive. He heard the sound of footsteps in the bedroom. He opened his hazy eyes and took a look. He saw the woman's luxurious clothes. She thought she must be someone with status in the palace. I wanted to put on my clothes quietly. As soon as he left, he would not let anything happen in the palace affect him. Unexpectedly, Qianlong woke up as soon as his body turned sideways. Emperor Qianlong woke up suddenly, looked around, and suddenly saw a woman standing there holding a remonstrance seal in her hand. Who is that woman? Needless to say, she is the Queen of Fu Cha. Emperor Qianlong was very shocked when he saw Fu Cha, because he was sleeping on the bed with the prostitutes, and Fu Cha found out about him. He felt very embarrassed, so he became angry and scolded. You came here because you wanted to what to do? After Fu Cha saw Emperor Qianlong questioning her, he knelt on the ground and said, I have something important to report to you. Thank you, Your Majesty, for your inspection. Emperor Qianlong knew that she would have something offensive to say, so he dared to barge in without asking the palace supervisor to report it first. Fu Chaho listened and replied. The slave is the queen of the main palace. Her position is high among the people and she lives in the daily life of the emperor. Of course, the slave can be close and serve her. Now that she is halfway through the journey, the slave should maintain her care. How can she dare to relax her duties? However, I have now heard that the emperor has behaved inappropriately, and I would like to give you some advice. Therefore, he does not avoid the crime of blasphemy and is eager to do so. But why would the emperor be suspicious of the slave and say that the slave is up to no good? Moreover, the emperor should think deeply. Such low-quality fireworks should not be approached. If the emperor is alarmed, who will be responsible? Emperor Qianlong listened to her another long speech and said angrily, "You still dare to argue cleverly. Do you know that your sin is very serious?" After saying that, he asked the palace supervisor Shaoan to come over, drag Fu Cha and go out. Fu Cha Ho knelt on the ground, unwilling to go anywhere, still nagging. The slave has been preparing to be the queen for many years. Although the emperor does not want to listen to the slave's loyal advice, why should he drag the slave out? Don't you just think about the love of incense? Why not first take a look at the slave's remonstrance to see if it is a good intention or a bad one? After listening to this, Emperor Qianlong got up and sat on the edge of the bed. He waved his hand to order Sai Hongfu and Sai Shisher to go away. He looked at Fu Cha fiercely and said nothing. After Fu Cha, he continued, "Your Majesty, the slave really has no other intention. Why is he so suspicious? How can the man who taught the slave such a bad reputation be in charge of the sixth palace again? I would like to resign from my position in order to be virtuous." But this remonstrance is composed of the blood and sincerity of the slave. If the emperor does not read it, the slave will never dare to retreat. When Emperor Qianlong arrived, he had no choice but to take the admonishment chapter from Empress Fu Cha and read it. He read what was written on the admonition chapter, which was full of extensive references. It is so direct and exciting that it probably draws metaphors from many allusions such as the lost house and leopard house. This kind of thing should be taken as a precursor. Emperor Qianlong was already annoyed after reading half of the article. His face suddenly turned green. He jumped up, aimed at Empress Fu Cha's face, and slapped her several times. While beating him, he shouted again, "Am I Emperor Yang or Emperor Zhengde of Sui dynasty? You are the mother of the country, but your words are incoherent. Can your sin be forgiven?" After saying that, he threw the admonishment in his hand on the ground and ordered the palace supervisor to drag it out. After the inspection, he called out to his ancestors 3 times. Still refused to go out. Emperor Qianlong pointed out, "This is a lunatic with phlegm disease. How can he be the mother of the emperor?" Then he sent an order to the palace guards to keep her in the back cabin. 17. After speaking against the ears and scorning the virtuous in anger. It is said that Emperor Qianlong became angry after reading Fu Cha's remonstrance. After criticizing Fu Cha, he slapped him several times and ordered the palace supervisors to drag him out and live in seclusion in the back cabin. The palace supervisors were about to take action, but Empress Fu Cha was still unwilling to go out. Emperor Qianlong saw her stubbornness, so he put on his clothes, stood up and walked out. "I want to go to see the Queen Mother." Empress Fu Cha knew that Emperor Qianlong's visit to the Queen Mother would be of no benefit to him, so he stepped forward to stop her. Empress Fu Cha was kneeling on the ground, so she hugged Emperor Qianlong's feet with both hands and still said, "Please, Your Majesty, please pause your thunderous anger and read the slave's remonstrance before going." When Emperor Qianlong heard her say the word admonishment chapter and mentioned the admonishment chapter, he became even more furious. At this time, Fu Chaho had already grabbed both of his feet, and he took advantage of the situation and used all his strength to kick him away. After Fu Cha was not prepared, and after seeing that Emperor Qianlong was a strong and powerful man, how could he withstand it? He fell to the sky, his ears bruised and his face swollen. The woman was so narrow-minded that she had already started to cry. Emperor Qianlong ignored him and walked out of the cabin. Enter the Queen Mother's dragon boat. When he met the Empress Dowager, he told the story of Empress Fucha's disturbance in detail, but he did not say anything about his own situation with a prostitute. After listening to Emperor Qianlong's words, the Queen Mother also remembered what happened in the palace in the past. No matter what the reason was, I thought that Empress Fucha's temperament was too stubborn. Therefore, for this quarrel, I not only did not blame Emperor Qianlong for his rage, but also blamed Empress Fucha's stubbornness. He comforted Emperor Qianlong and said, "Don't worry. Let me resolve this dispute for you." With that said, he ordered the palace supervisor to summon Fucha and then cross the boat to see him. Sure enough, within a short time, Fucha came back, crying like a tearful person, and even forgot the etiquette of kneeling down. When the Queen Mother saw this, she was very unhappy and advised, "Why are you bothering? Only now do I know that your temperament cannot be changed. If you continue to nag in front of the Emperor, your relationship will become even worse. Now I have some ideas for you. You might as well stay here in Jinan Prefecture temporarily. The palace here was originally an ancient temple. If you are able to practice Qing dynasty, you can stay here now. When this southern tour of anti-Beijing passes through here, if you have changed your nature, you can return to the capital with your companions, return to the palace, and still be able to serve as nuns all over the world. Isn't it good to be a leader?" Empress Fu Cha listened to a speech by the Queen Mother. Knowing that the Queen Mother was partial to Emperor Qianlong, how could she dare to argue, so she could only remain silent. After a long time, he said, "I know that there is no benefit in quarreling. It is a good thing that the Queen Mother has ordered me to clean up here. Because the slave really has no face to go back to the palace." The Queen Mother listened and sent an order to the palace supervisor to send her to Jifu Temple in Jinan Mansion. At this time, Emperor Qianlong had already slipped out. The Empress Fucha still wanted to argue with him about criticizing cheek and foot kicks, but how could she do that? The Queen Mother couldn't wait anymore and urged Fu Cha to go out several times. Empress Fu Cha had no choice but to leave sobbing with tears in her eyes. It turned out that Emperor Qianlong slipped out of the Queen Mother's boat, but returned to his own boat, thinking that the Queen Mother had ordered Fu Cha to go to the nunnery to clean up. The thorn in his side may have been removed, so he immediately ordered Shaoan to take back the Queen's seal and ribbon, and also ordered to remove the many guards who should be around the Queen. After Fu Cha was alone, seeing this desolate scene, he became increasingly sad. But according to the Queen Mother's will, I had to endure the suffocation in my stomach. Only Sun Yi, the palace eunuch who served him closely, was very loyal. He was afraid that there would be no one to wait on him when he arrived at the nunnery, so he went with him. Let's talk about the Zhifu Temple, which is located on the edge of Daming Lake. The scenery is very beautiful, but there are not many houses. The place is also very deserted. When Empress Fucha and Sun Yi arrived there, they were nothing more than arousing the excitement of medicine stoves, tea stoves, and scripture scrolls. As their companions, the atmosphere in the palace was completely different compared to the past. After staying for a few days, Fu Chaho suddenly received a letter from her father Fu Heng. The letter contained some words blaming Fu Chaho for his reckless behavior and unruly behavior towards women. She read these letters and shed tears unconsciously, sighing, "If my relatives cannot forgive me, I am afraid my future is hopeless." It turns out that after Emperor Qianlong forced Empress Fucha into Zhifu Temple, he removed his father Fu Heng and his uncle Fu Yong from all their official positions. As a result, the family's wealth suddenly declined. Fu Heng thought that his daughter must have disobeyed the imperial edict, which was why she was so frustrated. So I wrote this letter to rebuke Fu Chaho. 20. Raising funds from thousands of miles away to build a nunnery. After talking about it, Kong came to Beijing. Emperor Qianlong thought that she was a close friend and spent all day talking about Zen and reasoning. Liao Kong wanted to take this opportunity to say something nice to Yuan. This made Emperor Qianlong rediscover the meaning of the old sword, and felt that Emperor Qianlong was still angry about the fate when he talked about the incident with the queen. Looking at this situation, there is really no chance to speak. And I remembered when I was in Jinan before leaving for Beijing. Liao Yuan once told him not to think about getting back together again in front of Emperor Qianlong, so Liao Kong stopped talking. It turns out that Ling Kong came to Beijing to raise money to build a nunnery. When he and Ling Yuan were leaving for Jinan, he said to him, "My sister is coming to Beijing this time." Although he wanted to raise a huge sum of money to build a nunnery, his other purpose was to take the opportunity to give his sister some advice so that she could return to the palace and regain her post. This was just the girl's enthusiasm. Liao Yuan listened and stopped him, saying, "Go to Beijing and do your own business. You don't have to help me." "I'm very grateful for your kindness. It's just that if you try to help me, you are definitely not loving me. It is really hurting me." Liao Kong replied, "My sister is so timid after all. When she arrives in Beijing, she has her own ideas." When Liao Yuan saw that Kong was determined to help her, he cried, "You insist on going? That would kill me. I wanted to commit suicide at the beginning, but then I thought about why I had to mess up my parents' bodies in such a mess, so I don't think about the way to death recently. I really want to save this head for the rest of my life." Lakong listened and said sadly, "Why is my sister so sad when she says something? But why did the emperor reach such a point?" When Liao Kong said this, she remembered that Yuan prevented her from speaking out. Perhaps she suspected that she had no power. "I was afraid that after speaking out, not only would it be ineffective, but it would even lead to disaster. So she told everything about how she slept in the boat. Liao Yuan listened and said, "Although you are favored, it is only temporary, so you don't know his nature. It is really cold. You need to understand that the people in the world have the most cruel temperaments." The first bento was pushed to him. If he hears that I am not dead yet, he will definitely not give up. Last time I was ordained as a nun at Jifu Temple, I also changed my name. Now in the capital, most people say that I have been dead for a long time. So you don't have to have such useless hopes in the future. After listening to Liao Yuan's words, Liao Kong didn't dare to say any more. So after Liao Kong came to Beijing and met Emperor Qianlong, he didn't have any feelings for the old sword, so he obeyed Yuan's words and didn't mention Yuan. Moreover, Kong stayed in the capital for more than a month and raised a lot of money, so he returned home with a full load. Returning to Qihan Nunnery, he saw Yuan and said, "Although my sister has not returned to Tianjin for her sister when she went to Beijing this time, she has raised a huge amount of money and can build several nunneries. My sister now wants to build a nunnery in various scenic spots in the southern provinces, such as Mount Tai, Yangzhou, West Lake, Putuo, and many other places, so that my sister can travel around as she pleases and hang tins everywhere. It seems more comfortable than being confined in the palace." After hearing this, Liao Yuan liked it very much. When he had time, he spent a lot of money and hired many craftsmen to build a large nunnery by Daming Lake in Jinan. The large nunnery in Jinan was built, and nunneries were built in Jiangnan, eastern Zhejiang, and other places. Although the project was huge, it could not be completed overnight. But all that matters in the world is money. That thing can be done, so within half a year, many nunneries have been established. On the day of its creation, the Taoist temple was opened and many good men and women gathered. Liao Kong blew countless conchs outside in advance and said, "Liao Yuan is a deity transformed into a human being. She was born in the middle of a stone chamber in Lingzhou Mountain in the Western Paradise country. I don't know where her body came from. She once saved the world under the orders of the Buddha. Anyone who has a long-term fate can be saved." After this conch spread, people from all over the world came from far and wide to pay homage to it with fragrant flowers. Extremely respectful. At this time, Yuan ascended to the throne and lowered his eyebrows to preach. Her divine light is perfect, like a precious moon hanging in the sky. At night, there are thousands of magical lanterns shining through the stars, making people who worship the incense more and more convinced. Kong sees that his goal has been achieved. She named the large nunnery in Jinan Huiyin Nunnery because she did not forget her master. Then she invited Yuan to be the chief abbot, and she herself became the deputy abbot. From then on, the temple became prosperous. 18. Encountering dangers and misfortunes brings unexpected events. Let's talk about Empress Fu Cha and Sun Yi. When I first entered Jifu Nunnery, the abbot's nun was named Mei Xian. She thought it was a noble person coming, so she built several fine rooms to accommodate them. The general civil and military officials in Shandong province also rushed to follow him, and the supply was really abundant. After Fu Cha was in this situation, he and Sun Yi practiced meditation all day long, which made him feel very comfortable. In addition, many officials and gentry wives, with the mentality that handing over the queen would make them rich and powerful, often came to pay homage to those who paid homage, and presented gifts to those who presented them. Although Empress Fu Cha was not as dignified as when she was in the palace, she was still noble and noble. Time flies, and the years change. Emperor Qianlong came back from his tired tour of Suzhou and Hangzhou, and still followed the same route northward. Lu Jingnan did not ask for news about Empress Fu Cha, and the Queen Mother also ignored her. It was not until he returned to the capital that after a long time, he suddenly believed the words of concubine Yu and issued an edict, announcing to the world that the Empress Fu Cha should be abolished. It turns out that concubine Jade was originally a favored person of Emperor Qianlong, and she had a big disagreement with Empress Fu Cha, and they were irreconcilable enemies. This time Emperor Qianlong sent the Queen Mother back to Beijing. She knew that Queen Fu Cha had been demoted to a nunnery, and she was of course very happy. However, she was determined to stop doing nothing, so she took this opportunity to add insult to injury and encouraged Emperor Qianlong to abolish it. Emperor Qianlong had a very soft ear, and because he deeply hated Empress Fu Cha's bad temperament, concubine Yu joined the plan to abolish the empress, and Emperor Qianlong immediately issued an edict to implement it. Lunli Fu Cha Ho lived in a nunnery, which was the same as the one that had been abolished, but with this post-abolition edict. But it was a bitter experience for Empress Fu Cha. Because the officials and gentry in Jinan initially believed that Empress Fu Cha was the current queen, and the nobles came to her, they were very attracted to her. Now that they received the edict, half of them thought that the empress had been abolished in the palace, and of course there was another empress in the palace. It can be seen that the Queen of Jinan must be fake. Although half of the people understood that the Queen of Jinan must not be fake, since she was deposed by imperial edict, she certainly had no power at all. In the hot and cold world, human feelings are constant. They have these two thoughts. After he no longer worshipped Fu Cha, Mei Shi, the abbot of Zhifu Temple, also changed his blue eyes to white ones. After Fu Cha arrived in such a field, he felt embarrassed. But she had a lot of ideas, thinking that sitting in vain was not a permanent solution, so she ordered Sun Yi to go out. Go everywhere to seek enlightenment. Unfortunately, I was very young at this time, and rice was extremely expensive, so I could still get it there. After the inspection, he had no idea. Fortunately, he still had some gold beads and jewelry, so he ordered Sun Yi to pledge them to make ends meet. How could the precious things of the imperial family be comparable to ordinary things? Sun Yi was ordered to take a few pieces to the pawn shop for appraisal. All the clerks in the pawn shop were jealous. The number one skill of most scoundrels in the market is to spread rumors. Now the Empress Fu Cha ordered Sun Yi to pledge the rare treasure. They introduced fresh big questions and passed them on to 10, adding a lot of extra information to add more flavor. This rumor reached the ears of Abbot Nun Mei Xian. When Mei Xian heard this, he suddenly had evil thoughts in his heart. Na Meishin was originally a prostitute in Jinan Prefecture. Because she was suspected of arson, she shaved her head and became a nun to make a living. Fortunately, she was good at socializing and had a close relationship with the corrupt officials, evil gentry, and local thugs in Jinan Prefecture, so within a few years, she presided over this Jifu temple. Jifu Nunnery is a well-known and wealthy nunnery in Jinan Prefecture. She is the host, and everything about food and clothing is not very exquisite. Just because people's hearts are never satisfied, she heard that there were many precious jewelry after Fucha, so she decided to get them for herself. She knew a lot of people from the 9 level and 3 sects. With an order, the gangsters from Jinan Prefecture came to Jifu Temple at night and robbed it. Empress Fucha and Sun Yi were both people who had lived in the palace for a long time. After this happened, they were panicked and at a loss what to do. In this way, the robbers swept away all the precious jewelry owned by Empress Fucha, and whizzed away with the items in hand. After Empress Fucha waited for the robbers to leave, she saw that there was nothing left, so she sighed. The Queen Mother ordered me to live here, but she didn't come to inquire about it for a long time. This was because they clearly regarded me as a nun. At first, I thought that I would be able to return to this mortal world, so I still haven't shaved my hair. Now it seems that my future is very dangerous, so I might as well become a nun and live out my remaining life. He made up his mind, shaved off his hair, and fell into deep meditation. It is difficult for outsiders to see her face. Sun Yi also had a shaved head and looked like an ascetic tutu. 19. Sadness that a virtuous man lost his hair. It is said that after Fu Cha, she became a nun because she saw that Mei Xian, the host of Jifu Temple, was not a good person, so she and Sun Yi decided to do it. I found another nunnery as a place to stay. Nanny Nunnery is called Fayuan Nunnery and is also located on the shore of Daming Lake. I lived in a peaceful place for several years. Emperor Qianlong also visited the south several times, but every time Emperor Qianlong visited the south, he passed through Jinan Prefecture. In the end, there was no friendship with the old sword, so he went to visit Fu Chaho. This kind of cruel and unreasonable situation can also be regarded as the end of Emperor Qianlong's immorality. Let's say that there was a prostitute named Sai Hongfu that day, who was sleeping in the dragon boat. Someone who avoids Fucha after coming in. She saw with her own eyes the scene where Fu Cha was hugged and fucked, so when she got out of the boat, she felt that her life experience was ups and downs, and people's relationships were changing. It was really strange and unpredictable. After feeling this way, I felt as if I had some enlightenment. Then he cut off the root of his love, let his hair fall off, and shaved it in Shueihua Temple, and his Dharma name became empty. Shueihua Temple and Fayuan Temple were less than 20 miles apart. Sometimes they would go to temple fairs, and they would pass by each other, and they would become close friends. Liao Kong originally met Fu Cha. Just because he didn't dare to tell his origins rashly, Fu Chaho didn't know what kind of person Kong was. But they gradually became irresistible, talking about the classics and reasoning all day long, and finally showed some of their insights. Fu Chaho was very smart, so he realized the meaning of Zen early. Liao Kong was also a smart person. The joy of meeting a close friend is even more beneficial. It happened that there was Chiha Mountain more than 50 miles away from Daming Lake, and the nunnery on the mountain was named Chiha Nunnery. The abbot of Chiha Temple is a nun named Puyin. He is a very famous nun with excellent Taoism. The two of them discussed it. Let's go together to worship her as our teacher. After Fu Cha did not have a Dharma name, Puyin gave her a Dharma name and called it Yuan. From then on, the two of them lived with Puyin in Chiha Nunnery for several years. I stayed quiet for a long time and thought about it, wanting to expand my magic power. It makes Buddhism more solemn and splendid. He hoped to raise funds to build a large temple. A 13-level pagoda will also be built. When this news spread, the nuns in Jinan Prefecture thought that she wanted to create such a huge project with her bare hands. Isn't it just empty talk? So when everyone heard about this plan, not only did no one come to help design it, but everyone laughed at it. In fact, the nun's non-smile is nothing more than a mistake that her colleagues will be jealous of. The psychology of ordinary people. They are probably always afraid of people getting rich and themselves afraid of being poor, so they don't come to help, don't bother to show up, and secretly try their best to sabotage, so the money raised is very limited. Liao Kong had ambitions that were difficult to achieve, and felt that there was nothing he could do, so he discussed with Liao Yuan and asked Liao Yuan to go out to recruit people. Liao Yuan said, "I am also willing to sponsor this kind of merit, but I will never come forward to initiate it. Because I became a nun and can live in peace for the rest of my life, I am very lucky. How can you show your face and beg others again? Moreover, if I rashly show up and run around seeking change, and others listen, they will inevitably make false claims. If the court finds out, I will really be asking for my own death. I don't have to wait until today if I want to commit suicide. It's my duty to live my life to the fullest now. If you show your face, your life will not be saved, so I can't go and seek transformation on your behalf. It's not because of laziness, it's really because of your difficulties." Listening to Liao Kong, he knew that she had hidden feelings and was not trying to force her, but in the end he felt that Yuan was too incompetent. At this time, it was difficult to raise any money in Jinan Prefecture. Suddenly remembering his relationship with Emperor Qianlong, he personally set off from Jinan to the north and came to Beijing. "I came to Beijing empty-handed, with the original purpose of seeing Jia Qiuhua. She was originally a famous prostitute. Most famous prostitutes have special communication skills, so after she arrived in Beijing, she was very active. She had contacts with the princes and nobles and raised a lot of money. But she was still dissatisfied, so she spent some money, bribed the palace eunuch, and taught the palace eunuch to pass the report to Emperor Qianlong. Emperor Qianlong remembered his old relationship, so he went to Kong's residence incognito, and talked to Kong in person about Zen. They were very affectionate, but in name they were just friends, but in fact they were only skin-to-skin relations. The princes, and nobles heard that he was just a close friend of the emperor, and they began to rush to donate huge sums of money. Emperor Qianlong also sent an edict to donate tens of thousands of silver from his own funds. When the money was spent, the goal was achieved. This trip was really worthwhile. 21. There is a reason for talking about Zen. After talking about Yuan and Likong, the abbot's Huiyin nunnery became prosperous and the life was very comfortable. In the blink of an eye, a year passed without realizing it. At that time, Emperor Qianlong made another southern tour and came to Jinan all the way. As usual, whenever the emperor passed through Fanyu, he should come to pick him up. Nowadays, the reputation of Huiyin nunnery is known to everyone in Shandong. Of course, the local officials and gentry will tell the story of Huiyin nunnery and talk about how the abbot nun is miraculous. Emperor Qianlong listened. He hurriedly sent several palace supervisors to call the abbot nun of Huiyin Temple to come to see him. With a decree, the palace supervisor flew away. After an hour passed, the palace supervisors let a nun in. Emperor Qianlong looked up and was surprised. It turned out that the nun was none other than the prostitute Sai Hongfu. When Emperor Qianlong and Sai Hongfu parted in Beijing, although he already knew that she had become a nun, he thought that she was a traveling nun, but he never expected that Sai Hongfu was actually in Jinan. Became a virtuous Jiaoni. So he was surprised. Is it you? Are you here? How are you doing lately? Listening to this, Liao Kong hurriedly knelt down in the dust, kowtowed and thanked him, but he only agreed. Emperor Qianlong then asked, "Why did you come here after hearing that you dared to be the clavicle bodhisattva here?" When Liao Kong heard Emperor Qianlong talking about Zen, he clasped his hands and said, "I made the lions roar specifically for the great Buddha of Western Heaven, so that the good men and women in the lower world can hear and see it." Emperor Qianlong smiled and said, "The lion is chasing the rabbit. Why do you fall in love with this?" He clasped his hands in the air and said, "Sin, sin." Both the lion and the rabbit are living beings, and they both have samyak sambodhicitta, and fighting them is even worse. Even if the emperor asked him to fight, he would not fight. Besides, the emperor would not ask him to fight. Emperor Qianlong laughed and said, "It's even worse if you ask him to fight." Liao Kong still clasped his hands and said, "But he is worshipping peacefully." The rabbit is the lion, and the lion is the rabbit. It doesn't matter if the emperor says he will fight, or if the emperor doesn't say he fights. Emperor Qianlong laughed again after hearing this. After talking for a while, he made no excuses. It turns out that Emperor Qianlong and Liao Kong had a conversation about Zen, which meant Liao Kong. Every sentence contains a pun, and there is a reason behind every word. Emperor Qianlong didn't pay attention, so he didn't understand what was going on. After saying that Kong had withdrawn, Emperor Qianlong summoned the welcoming gentlemen and bureaucrats to see him. All the officials and gentry are capable of running like horses and oxen. But the emperor was asked to go ashore for a tour. Emperor Qianlong also admired the scenic spots of Daming Lake for a long time, so he listened to their instigation and immediately came ashore. Bypassing the 6th Street and 3 cities, we were already at Daming Lake. Passing by the Huiyin Nunnery, the official said, "This is Huiyin Nunnery." The last time we held a large ceremony, it was also here. Emperor Qianlong saw that Huiyin Nunnery was already there and remembered Kong, so he asked, "The nun who came in just now, whose name was Kong, is she the abbot of Huiyin Nunnery here?" The officials and gentry heard Emperor Qianlong ask about the origin of Kong. Then he replied, "La Kong is the deputy abbot of Huiyin Temple, and there is also a chief abbot who is highly virtuous. Last time, the abbot was preaching here at the Dharma ground, and all the slaves saw this person. This man has a bright look and a solemn appearance. I don't know where he comes from, but it must be Jiaoni from a famous mountain, otherwise it would never be so solemn and brilliant." Emperor Qianlong was very happy when he heard from the officials that there was an abbot with excellent moral practices. He wanted to meet him and asked hurriedly, "Where is this man now? Why not call her to meet you? Why didn't she mention it when she came to see the driver just now?" Said, and hurriedly conveyed the order to the palace supervisors and called Kong again to see him. In less than a minute, it was empty again. Emperor Qianlong asked about the origin of the abbot, and he said, "Yes, there is a divine nun here who has excellent Taoism. This man was destined to be named Dharma, and now he has gone to Jizu Mountain in Yunnan, so Xiaoni didn't know about it just now." Emperor Qianlong said angrily, "Why did you go away after hearing this? Are you just talking nonsense?" Liao Kong said, "He told Xiaoni the day before yesterday that he and the emperor had not been together for a long time. Now is not the time to meet, so we are traveling far south to avoid this dust route." Xiaoni didn't know what she meant after hearing her words, but yesterday she saw that the sacred room where she lived was empty, so she didn't dare to tell her. When Emperor Qianlong arrived, he felt blessed in his soul. Only then did he remember that there was a reason behind his words, and he knew that the current abbot must be Fu Chaho, so he lost his voice and said, "Is it a long-term fate?" He hasn't finished speaking yet, so he won't continue. Liao Kong knew that Emperor Qianlong had already felt this, so he resigned again. 22. Enemies encounter difficulties again and again, and the road is narrow. After saying this, Emperor Qianlong felt that there was a reason for his words. After quitting, she thought that the opportunity had come. With the money she raised, there was still a lot left to build the nunnery, so she spent 2,000 taels of silver as a filial piety. He became the eunuch in charge. The chief eunuch's eyes widened when he saw the money. Sure enough, he obeyed Kong's instructions and said many good things to Yuan in front of Emperor Qianlong. Emperor Qianlong found out in a moment of conscience, so Yun waited for the tour from the south and took Yuan back to Beijing. The eunuch passed this news to Kong Zhizhi. The emptiness is gone and the fate is known. So everyone celebrated with their hands on their faces. However, Liao Kong was not very relieved, so he went to see the emperor in person. Emperor Qianlong was indeed sincere in repenting at this time, because he said, although her temper is not good, she has been wandering for several years, and she is tired from the world. I now want to travel to the south, bring her back to the capital, and build her a nunnery in the western mountains so that she can cultivate her purity throughout her life. You can go back and tell her, just treat her well now. I accepted the order, thanked him and withdrew, thinking that my goal was completely achieved. So I happily arranged my return to Beijing with Liao Yuan. A few days later, Emperor Qianlong's car left Jinan and headed straight for Yangzhou. Lakong also left Jinan because there were Buddhist services in the nunnery and he had to go to Putuo to offer incense. Even though he was destined, he still stayed quietly in Huiyin nunnery. Waiting eagerly for the car to come back, we will return to Beijing together. Unexpectedly, misfortune has already arrived before good fortune comes. As the saying goes, God has unforeseen circumstances, and people have misfortunes and misfortunes. God's will is unpredictable and really bizarre. In short, if a person has good luck, everything will go well for him. If he has bad luck, everything will go wrong. Na Yuan had just hoped to return to Beijing, but he suffered a big impact. What was this impact? I'll tell you more about it later when I'm writing a book. Judges, please think about it first. Isn't there a jade concubine in the palace? That jade concubine is Liao Yuan's enemy. Last time, concubine Jade added insult to injury. After instigating Emperor Qianlong to issue the edict, the officials probably remembered it and will not mention it again in the previous article. Let's say that this time Emperor Qianlong gave up his promise, and when he returned to Beijing from his southern tour, he took Liao Yuan back to Beijing and settled in Xishan. Someone had already reported this news to concubine Yu. It turned out that concubine Yu was not very relieved after she encouraged Emperor Qianlong to issue an edict to abolish the empress. She sent many confidants to visit the traces of the empress day and night. Emperor Qianlong made several southern tours. Although concubine Yu was not with her, but he also sent a few close palace supervisors. After snooping around Emperor Qianlong for news, Luo Yuan had hope of returning to Beijing, and her confidants immediately reported the news. Concubine Yu knew about Yuan and thought that it would be very dangerous for her if her enemy did not go away. Then your life and body will be ruined in the hands of Yuan. As a result, she hatched another vicious plan. She took advantage of the fact that the Queen Mother was a fool, and she disliked the Queen very much at the beginning, so concubine Jade used the name of the Queen Mother to issue an edict, saying, "The devil's words are used to confuse the public. Everything he did was against the law, and he should be arrested and questioned by law." After concubine Yu issued the edict, she immediately sent many soldiers and horses to the south to capture Yuan. But as luck would have it, the eunuch in charge whom Ling Kong had bribed when he was raising funds in Beijing was still in Beijing. Seeing that concubine Yu had issued an edict, the eunuch hurriedly sent his brother to rush along the trail day and night. The eunuch's name was Pierre, and his brother's name was Xiaopi. Xiaopi was very capable, and he really outran the troops sent by concubine Yu. The troops sent by concubine Jade are still halfway there. Xiaopi has already arrived at Qianlong mansion. Xiaopi had something on his mind, so he hurriedly went to find Kong to talk. At this time, Liao Kong went to Putuo. Xiaopi missed it. Of course he was very anxious, so he had to explain directly to Yuan. Na Yuan is a stubborn person by nature. Xiaopi didn't care after hearing what he said. Xiaopi said anxiously, "Mother, please be careful. This matter is unusual. Now the emperor is out on patrol. If concubine Jade is captured and brought to Beijing, the future of the empress will be in doubt. This slave will not avoid danger this time, but comes here to report the news. I originally wanted to ask the empress to stay away for a few days before making any arrangements." After hearing this, he still refused to avoid it and replied, "Since I am a sinner now, I can't avoid it anywhere. Even if I avoid it somewhere else, there is no way. Now they want me to die, but it doesn't matter if I die. I wasn't planning on living anymore." Seeing her stubbornness, Xiaopi could only sigh and leave. 23. After rescuing the virtuous, the famous prostitute acted righteously. It is said that Xiaopi made up his mind after seeing Yuan, and would rather sit back and wait for arrest, but finally refused to avoid it in advance, so he had to sigh and leave. "I just wanted to continue heading north." It happened that Kong was returning to Jinan from Putuo, so Xiaopi hurriedly went to tell Kong about the situation. After listening to this, he wanted to go and try his best to persuade Yuan to avoid hiding. However, things were already getting serious, and many soldiers and horses sent by concubine Yu came to Jinan at noon that night. Although Liao Kong wanted to save Yuan, he had no chance to take action. She was a very smart person, so she thought that if she didn't go away, the forces would be captured by the soldiers sent by concubine Jade. Instead of losing both sides, she might as well escape first, and let fate suffer some hardships first. Then try to save her yourself. Liao Kong made up his mind and left without meeting Liao Yuan, heading straight to Yangzhou. Neji Yuan did not listen to Xiaopi's words and stayed in Huiyin Temple, waiting for soldiers and horses to come and capture him. Sure enough, the soldiers and horses came to Jinan, and there were the military gentlemen who she said were so heroic. It was determined that Yuan was an imperial prisoner captured by the order, and regardless of the situation, he put Yuan into a prison car, surrounded by many soldiers and horses, and headed straight for the capital. "I suffered a lot along the way and suffered all kinds of abuse from the escorting officials. It was really miserable. After walking for more than a month, I came to the capital. Concubine Yu then ordered Liao Yuan to be imprisoned in a special prison. Let's talk about Kong coming to Yangzhou and living in a small nunnery near Pingshan Hall. She originally wanted to wait for Emperor Qianlong to pass by Yangzhou and make some suggestions. Later, I lost my mind and thought that it was not too late. I was afraid that I might have arrived in Beijing and be murdered by concubine Yu's gang, so she bundled a lot of money into Beijing. Fortunately, she was very capable and paid bribes, which delayed the case for a long time. Liao Kong went through the eunuch's path again and taught the eunuch to tell concubine Yu that it was fate. Since she had become a monk and lost her hair, of course she could not come back to the palace. However, the emperor allowed her to take her back to Beijing because the emperor hated her very much, wanting to take her back to Beijing and hide her in a secluded palace. If we kill her now without waiting for the emperor to return to Beijing, I'm afraid it is not the emperor's original intention. The emperor is about to become suspicious, so it is better to wait until the emperor returns to Beijing. Concubine Yu heard what the eunuch said and thought it was very reasonable, so she ordered Yuan to be imprisoned in the Ministry of Internal Affairs. She entered the Ministry of Internal Affairs and studied the Avatamsaka Sutra as her homework day and night. She sat upright, did not eat, and only drank some water every day. Liao Kong knew that Yuan was suffering very much from the Ministry of Internal Affairs, but there was no way to save her. At this time, the third girl was still in Beijing. He opened a brothel, and because of his age and beauty, he became the proprietor of the brothel. He was always generous with his wealth and had a reputation as a chivalrous person in the capital. Liao Kong thought it would be better to ask the third girl for help, maybe she could help. So he came to see him. The third girl turns out to be a person who welcomes everyone. When he saw Kong and heard what Kong said, he jumped up and said, "Common people and their husbands cannot be thrown away without any reason, let alone the rich and beautiful mother of the country. Can they be divorced casually? In my early years, although it was because of the incident involving Gaishi, I was bullied several times by the queen's uncle, who was also my enemy in terms of Yuan, but I was a very outspoken person. Since I was punished because of Yuan's loyalty and advice, I can be regarded as a virtuous queen. Now she is in such danger, if I can't save her, my heart is never at peace. Besides, if I repay evil with kindness, I can see what kind of person my third girl is." Liao Kong saw that the three girls were very loyal, and he really admired them. After the third girl agreed, Kong could not save Yuan. She immediately gathered a group of Kansai men under her. There were 70 or 80 people in that group of Guanxi men. They were all raised by Miss San, so they all came as soon as they heard the order. The third girl dressed herself up and led a group of Kansai men all the way to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. There was no official from the Ministry of Internal Affairs who had not admired the reputation of the third girl for a long time, and no one did not know that the third girl had a physical relationship with Emperor Qianlong. Therefore, the third girl led many big men from Guanxi to the door. How could they dare to stop her? We had to let them go straight in. The third girl then called them in. When they saw Yuan, they didn't say anything. With a command, 70 or 80 Guanxi sighed and carried Yuan into the middle of the sedan with all their hands and feet, and then carried him out again. The third girl's home. 24. Nostalgic for old love, Qianlong discovered. It is said that the third girl accepted Kong's instructions and indeed snatched the fate back. After meeting the fate, he temporarily stayed at the third girl's place. When he arrived, he could be regarded as a confidant in times of trouble. After a long time, Emperor Qianlong drove back to Beijing, and concubine Jade was in front of Emperor Qianlong. He spread many rumors and pretended to be predestined. As expected, Emperor Qianlong said that he would ask the minister in charge of the Ministry of Internal Affairs to find this person. Officials from the Ministry of Internal Affairs did not dare to say that the third girl had snatched Yuan away from her. They just said that it had been stolen by bandits. Emperor Qianlong was a little suspicious, because there was a robbery during the day on the ground in the capital, and in the middle of the yamen of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, so he reprimanded the minister in charge of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, who had to accept the blame. Carry. Only concubine Jade in the palace heard that her fate was being snatched away by others, and she was even more annoyed. Now she took advantage of Emperor Qianlong's opportunity to reprimand the minister in charge of the Ministry of Internal Affairs to ask Emperor Qianlong to arrest and punish the robbers. Of course Emperor Qianlong agreed. But this kind of robber. Teach the officials in the capital how to catch him. So after a long delay, the robber was not caught. At this time, Emperor Qianlong already knew that it was the third girl who took away Yuan. This kind of news was explained to Emperor Qianlong by the palace supervisor Xiaoan. However, Emperor Qianlong remembered his relationship with the third girl and knew that the third girl was a capable person, so he pretended to be deaf and ignored him even though he knew that the third girl had taken away his fate. Many days passed, and Emperor Qianlong felt a little bored in the palace. Then he went out incognito again and came to the third girl's place to hang out. Sora is there too. However, it was inconvenient to meet Emperor Qianlong, so he took refuge in another room for the time being. When Emperor Qianlong saw the third girl and Kong, he smiled and asked, "Why are you so impatient and willing to become robbers? Who commits such a crime that deserves to be beheaded?" The third girl said, "If we don't become robbers, then the emperor will be guilty of killing his wife. So we would rather be robbers, lest the emperor commit a crime. If the emperor doesn't reward such loyalty, will he blame us instead?" Emperor Qianlong listened and laughed and said, "You can be regarded as the most powerful person among those who rely on favor and arrogance." The third girl took advantage of the situation and knelt down in the dust, saying, "Thanks. The emperor loves us so much. It shows how much God's grace has given us. But we are deeply favored. Is it the only queen who has the heart to keep her from the rain and dew? If the emperor doesn't put her in a proper position, then Xiao will use poisonous tactics, and the queen's life will eventually be difficult to save, and the emperor will inevitably be charged with killing his wife. The maids have to bear a share of fear for the emperor." Now that we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, why don't the emperor arrange the queen properly so that there will never be any worries in the future? That is the gift of the emperor. Emperor Qianlong listened and nodded in agreement. The three girls felt nostalgic when they saw Emperor Qianlong. So he and Kong went out to meet each other with Yuan. Emperor Qianlong found out, so he took Yuan's hand and comforted him. After meeting the fate, he said nothing to him. He only said, "I hope the emperor will cultivate virtue and love himself, so that the slave can be at ease." After hearing this, Emperor Qianlong sympathized with Yuan's plight. Yuan agreed to welcome him back to Cunning Palace today. He thanked me and said, "Your Majesty's grace is truly as great as the heavens. Of course I am very happy. But since the emperor gave up the slave's heart has been like a wild crane in the clouds, and the etiquette of the palace has not been practiced for a long time. If you lose your etiquette..." Perhaps he was convicted because of this. Although it was the slave's own fault, it was by no means the result of the emperor's favor. Therefore, if the emperor can forgive me for my stupidity, I hope that the emperor will designate a nunnery so that I can live out my remaining years. I will be extremely grateful. Emperor Qianlong listened. With a sad promise, he immediately took the pen and ink and wrote an edict, instructing Yuan to preside over Tianning Temple in Yangzhou, and ordered the local area to provide food at any time and send people to protect him. After some chance encounters, I thanked him and left. Emperor Qianlong stayed at the third girl's place that night. When it was first light, Emperor Qianlong returned to the palace without mentioning it. The third girl waited for Emperor Qianlong to leave and then discussed it with Kong Liaoyuan. The three of them discussed it, and when they were free, they took the imperial edict from Emperor Qianlong and sent Yuan off to the south, but the three girls were still in Beijing. At this time, Emperor Qianlong issued another edict, ordering the governor of Jiangnan to serve at any time. So everyone in the world knew that Yuan was the former deposed queen, and now lived in Yangzhou. Therefore, the generally snobbish officials and gentry were rushing to come. Followed. 25. Believe in the slanderous words and secretly use poisonous tactics. It was said that Yuan Fengji presided over Tianning Temple in Yangzhou. Because people knew that she was a queen and had been ordered to become a monk, they all came to worship her. Liao Yuan thought it was too complicated, so he built another monastery in a quiet place in the mountains and forests. I don't interact with other people, so I feel at ease when I arrive. From then on, Liao Kong lived sometimes in Jinan and sometimes in Yangzhou during the year. She was also very free and unrestrained. Moreover, relying on her former relationship with the bedchamber and the power of the third girl, she was able to travel to and from the palace and became very famous. Usually, when the censors are full and have nothing to do, they go to Shu and ask for a rest and treatment. When Emperor Qianlong saw this kind of memorial, of course he ignored it and wiped it away like a table. But concubine Yu knew that Yuan was ordered to become a monk in Yangzhou, but it was all because of nothing. Feeling very upset, she discussed with her close friends how to take revenge. There is a party member named Atayatu, who is an official and internal minister and is the closest red member to Emperor Qianlong. Following the order of concubine Jade, Atayatu stepped forward and said to Emperor Qianlong, That nun was empty, neither a monk nor a lay person. She used the right way to deceive people. In fact, the harm caused by the right way to deceive people is relatively small, but spreading the emperor's sins is a big crime. The emperor thought that Kong could be loyal and sincere, but he didn't know that she kept secrets about the deposed queen and the palace. Talk nonsense when meeting people. I mean, slave, why does the emperor have to be notorious because he loves a woman? Emperor Qianlong was really annoyed when he heard this. But as soon as I thought about it, I remembered that I had allowed them to be free, and if I wanted to arrest them again. Wouldn't it make the governor of other provinces laugh? Emperor Qianlong always acted under the guise of Yao and Shun, and his hearts were in agreement with Jia and Zhou, so he thought that it was better to do things overtly than to do things secretly, so he secretly ordered the local officials to check for Kong's traces, and then secretly sent a few strong men to take the opportunity to kill Kong. I want to eliminate this kind of mouth. Liao Kong is also a person who is always careful. She found out this kind of news clearly and went to discuss strategies with the third girl. The third girl said, "That's why I never leave Beijing. Because of the ground in Beijing. My power can be spread universally, and there is no place for them to attack. If it goes beyond this range, I can't guarantee it." So when he was free, he stayed at the third girl's place, not daring to show his face, and stayed there for 2 full years. I was very bored after the flight, and I thought about going south to Yangzhou several times. I went to see Yuan, but was stopped by the third girl, who taught her not to take risks. I had to keep it when it was empty. After a long time, the third girl's mother died suddenly. The third girl wanted to go to the South China Sea to do a dojo, so she gathered a group of Kansai men to serve as guards, and the guards were very tight. Liao Kong took advantage of this opportunity and wanted to go south together. The 3 girls could not refuse and had to agree. Until Yangzhou, I met Yuan, and the 3 girls invited Yuan to go to the South China Sea with him on the same boat. I was afraid that going out to show off would be very detrimental to me, so I didn't want to go with him. When he was empty, he continued. At first, because of a plot by a traitor, I stayed in seclusion for 3 years, and it was only now that I was able to come south. But now that the third girl has many guards, the traitors don't dare to do anything. We are almost old now. If we don't go to the general courtyard to offer incense, in a few years, we will all be rotten wood. Why not take advantage of this breath of life to visit Lingshan together and understand the wonderful truth together? This is an opportunity not to be missed. Due to the fate, we had no choice but to go together. The 3 of them crossed the Yangtze River and stayed at Jinshan Temple. Liao Yuan happened to have some minor illness and was bedridden. Liao Kong and the third girl visited the dojo of Jinshan Temple over and over again. Show up and speak the truth once. After the ashram, Liao Kong was suffering from the stifling smell of cigarettes, so he helped a young nun to climb up to the wonderful platform to watch the scenery of the Yangtze River. While he was enjoying himself, suddenly a reckless man who looked like a gigantic cloud came straight towards him. His eyes were fixed on Sora. Liao Kong also paid close attention and took a closer look. He knew that this person was a palace supervisor next to concubine Jade. He had seen him in the imperial boat. He was shocked, but he wanted to run away, but there was no time. The man pulled out a sharp knife and stabbed Sora in the chest. After taking the knife in the air, she relied on her own strength to pinch his arm with her backhand. The two of them fought together, unable to stand, and both fell off the stage. Below the stage is the Yangtze River, and the tide rolls in and reaches the center of the waves. Seeing this situation, the little nun was already frightened out of her wits. I was so busy that I told the third girl and many nuns that they knew. The third girl led the nuns to the stage and saw that there was no trace of them anywhere, so she could only sigh. 26. Brutally robbed and turned into ashes. It is said that the third girl saw the sky and was swept into the Yangtze River by the enemy, with no body left. Unexpectedly, he panicked, so he had to take strict precautions and wanted to send him to Yangzhou anyway to avoid being plotted. However, I was afraid that I would be frightened if I heard that Kong was causing trouble when I was sick, so I kept it a secret and did not say anything when I saw Yuan. I'll probably go to Yangzhou in a few days. After hearing this, Liao Yuan couldn't think of anything unexpected, so he went back to Yangzhou alone. After the third girl got her chance to go back, she went to Putuo to offer incense and stayed there for half a month. She did not dare to stay for a long time, so she followed the road north. Passing by Yangzhou, I came out to say goodbye to the third girl. But Kong was still missing. Liao Yuan couldn't help but have doubts in his heart, but the third girl still didn't speak out. The two got together for a few days. The third girl set off back to Beijing because there were still many things in the capital that had not been settled properly. After meeting the third girl by chance, he interrogated the little nun and said, "What happened to Liao Kong?" The little nun knew that the matter could no longer be kept secret, so she had to tell the story of Kong being assassinated, and said, "The reason why I didn't tell the truth last time was because the third girl asked me. Now that she has returned to Beijing, so only then dare to tell." Liao Yuan listened. He was shocked and said, "This must be the conspiracy sent by concubine Jade. Well, she actually lost her life because of me. How can I be worthy of her? Besides, my friend is dead, so I am no longer alone." After being stimulated by this meridian, from then on, he became seriously ill, and his condition became worse day by day. Later, when Liao Yuan realized that he was seriously ill and in critical condition, he got up and wrote a letter to tell the third girl. The letter contained nothing more than farewell words. I also wanted to ask the third girl to try to tell Emperor Qianlong of the incident and beg Emperor Qianlong to forgive her. Her coffin and coffin were still buried next to the cemetery so that her soul could still be close to her ancestors, Emperor and Empress. On the one hand, Liao Yuan wrote to the third girl, and on the other hand, he went to explain to the Yangzhou magistrate that although he was guilty and deposed, he would never forget the emperor's kindness. After death, One still has to report to the imperial court first, so that every detail is taken into account, and the emperor's imperial edict is all that is needed to determine what kind of funeral and burial should be carried out. After the instructions were given, the illness became more serious, but the Yangzhou magistrate did not dare to inform him rashly. At this time, the third girl received a letter from Yuan in the capital. He rushed to Yangzhou day and night, and by chance, he died on the previous day. The third girl then supervised the local officials in Yangzhou to bury the coffin with the etiquette of a queen. Only then did the local officials go to Shangshu to report the memorial, requesting an order to send Ziguan to the north. The memorial was sent to Beijing. Emperor Qianlong saw her. Although he had not had a good relationship with the queen in his life, he still had some affection for her. When it was time to die, why didn't he mourn her? So he wanted to use the etiquette of the queen to bury her in the cemetery. Unexpectedly, the enemy was in a narrow road, and concubine Yu had already filled the position of the queen in the main palace. After hearing the news, he could not tolerate it, so he said in front of Emperor Qianlong, "How can you show the world that you treat a nun who has become a monk as a queen?" Emperor Qianlong listened and changed his original intention. He issued an edict: since he lives abroad and has no fortune, he cannot be buried later. How can there be a mother of a country without hair in ancient and modern times? It should be cremated according to the burial method of monks and nuns. After this decree was issued, the local magistrate of Yangzhou poured out Liao Yuan from the middle of the coffin, set off a ruthless fire, and burned Liao Yuan's body until his limbs were mutilated. After all, the human body is no better than rice firewood. Even if you set a fire, it would be difficult to burn it clean immediately. It burned for a long time, leaving behind many withered bones and residual flesh. The local officials in Yangzhou took the remaining bones and buried them hastily under the pagoda behind the temple. After the landlord's affairs were completed, he reported to the court and Emperor Qianlong issued another secret edict. Teach the local officials in Yangzhou to keep this matter a secret and never tell it. If the news leaks out, the crime will not be light. Judges, please think about the emperor's will in the autocratic era. Who dared to disobey the emperor's will? So the local officials kept silent and dared not speak, and the ordinary people had no way of knowing. Everyone thought that it must be a witch who pretended to be a palace official and was cremated to destroy her traces. The person who endured hardship all his life and burned his body after death was the virtuous Empress Fucha. The third girl saw this kind of thing that was so heartbreaking that she wanted to vent her anger on Fu Chaho. Just because the luck in the Qing dynasty was so good and there was no way to start, he was so angry that he came out of Daguan. Later, he didn't know where he ended up. He probably became a member of the swordsman sect. Emperor Qianlong later passed on the throne to the crown prince, and died within a few years. Little did he know that after Emperor Qianlong's death, he met Empress Fu Cha. How can we meet each other face to face?